Please go ahead, Guruji.
Om Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpadam Shankaram Lokashankaram Purana Nyaya Mimamsa Dharma Shastranga Mishritaha Vedaha Sthanani Vidyanam Dharmasya cha Chaturdasha Ayurvedo Dhanurvedo Gandharvaschaiva Tetrayaha Arthashastram Chaturthantu Vidyaha Ashtadashaiva Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste. I welcome everyone who has joined us today for this Indica Symposium, Chandas, Cadences of Indic Thought, brought to you by Indica's Center for Bharatiya Languages. In the next 3.5 hours, we have 8 wonderful scholarly minds who would reflect on this topic and share their presentations, the schedule of which is on the screen right now. With no further ado, I'd like to call upon the curator of this symposium, Arvind V. Iyer. Arvind, take it away from here with the symposium concept.
Om Tat Sat. Varnanam Artha Sanghanam Rasanam Chandasam Mangalanam Chakartaro Vande Vani Vinayaka. That is the opening verse of Sri Ramcharitmanas by Goswami Tulasīdāsa, and a translation in English via Gita Press is, I reverence Vani, the goddess of speech, and Vinayaka, Lord Ganesha, the originators of sounds represented by the alphabet, of the multitudes of objects denoted by those sounds, of poetic sentiments as well as of meters, and the begetters of all auspiciousness. The verse itself refers to Chandas or meter as having the most blessed origins, and also shows Chandas in a wholesome togetherness with words and meaning. The verse also shares important similarities in structure with the verses recited by Meghji during the invocation at the start. Each verse had 4 quarters called padas or feet. Each pada or foot had exactly 8 sounds or syllables. Vande Vani Vinayaka. Further, there are rules that have been followed about whether a sound occurring at a specific position in a foot was short, like ha or ri, or long, like re or gum. These specifications of counts and measures define a chandas or meter, and in this example, a specific meter by the name Anushtu. Consider another meter where each pada has 11 syllables in this pattern. Nanana, 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 nana. A devotional verse in this meter familiar to children goes, Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva, tvameva bandhushcha sakha tvameva, tvameva vidya dravinam tvameva, tvameva sarvam mamadeva deva. This meter is called Upendra Vajra. It belongs to the Trishtub class of meters, which, like the Anushtub class we saw in the earlier examples, has origins going back to the Veda. Poetic meters, or Chandamsi, like these ancient ones and others that blossomed in later periods, are the topic of today's symposium titled Chandas, Cadences of Indic Thought. Poetry, on the whole, occupies a rather reduced space in the modern schooling experience, both in the page count of language textbooks and in the memory of most students once they finish schooling. In the living Bharatiya traditions, by contrast, poetry starts at the nursery rhyme stage where children are taught verses like Tvameva Matacha, and thereafter remains undiminished as a prime medium of expression for the entire range of Bharatiya thought. Shruti, Smriti, Purana, Itihasa, Mahakavyas, Shastra Granthas, and so on. Metric verse, along with being a medium of expression, is also a medium of impression into both young minds and matured minds. Acquiring an early familiarity and a feel for Chandas brings the advantages of greater ease and fuller joy in the study of Bharatiya literature by developing both reading fluency and aesthetic sensitivity. We look forward today to experiencing the ease and the joy that the rhythm of Chandas brings in a practical demonstration by Srimati Sri Lalita Rupanagudi and Sri Raghuvaṃśa Hebbadalu. During learning and recitation of the Veda mantras in a traditional manner, it's customary to acknowledge the name of the Chandas of the mantra, along with the names of the Rishi who first witnessed the mantra and the Devatā to whom it is addressed. The place of Chandas is thus prominent right from the Veda onwards. The Chandaḥ-śāstra of Pingala is a definitive pioneering text in Chandas, like the Ashtadhyayi of Panini is for Vyākaraṇa. And it contains a treatment of poetic meters occurring in the Veda corpus. The mathematical problem of enumerating possible meters in verses of a given length, both in Pingala's text and in later texts such as Halayudhas and Virahankas in the second millennium of the Common Era, have stimulated early Indian efforts in the field of combinatorics. Poetic meters employed in Shastra and Kāvya literature, as enumerated in the 10th century Vritta-ratnakara of Kedara Bhatta, are more numerous and varied than those occurring in the Veda. Chandas, like Vyākaraṇa, developed as a Shastra in its own right, and also as a discipline of expression for other Shastras. We are fortunate today to have two scholars at our symposium speaking on the science of Chandas. GSS Murthyji will speak to us about fundamental questions in the discipline of Chandas, such as the systematic characterization of the Anushtubh meter, drawing on decades of research. B.N. Shashikiranaji will speak on the Chandogati, a landmark 20th century work on Chandaḥ-śāstra written in Kannada. It is in the realm of kāvya that the artistic possibilities of Chandas are experienced in all their grandeur. While poets have immense artistic freedom in choosing meters, some meters have come to be naturally associated with some types of compositions, like the meter Manda Kranta for the Duta Kāvya genre addressed to messengers for a lover, like in Kālidāsa's Meghaduta, and the meter Vasanta Tilaka for the Suprabhatam class of Stotra Kāvya, accompanying morning worship at temples. The art of arranging patterns of sound in time in metric verse has an extension in the spatial visual realm in the art of Chitra Kāvya. We have today the privilege of hearing an acclaimed practitioner of this marvelous art form, Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, on the interface of Chandas and Chitra Kāvya. A testimony to the enduring appeal of the metric verse medium to Bharatiya hearts and minds across time and space is that this medium, over all others, was chosen for Vālmīki's Rāmāyaṇa from deep antiquity and Kālidāsa's Raghuvaṃśa in the classical period, and also in the Rāmāyaṇa relived by Kamban in Tamil or Tulasīdāsa in Avadhī or Krittivasa in Bangla closer to our times. Sayings that are recalled by Bharatiyas to this day and serve to connect them with both the sacred and worldly wisdom of the ages, such as Subhāṣita-s in Sanskritam, Kurals in Tamil, or dohā-s in Avadhī, are in metric verse. Stotra kāvyas, or devotional poetry, and drishya kāvyas, or Sanskrit drama, both have served to bring Chandas on stage and in unison with performing arts such as music and dance. We await some fascinating glimpses today of meters across Bharatiya languages, accompanied by music from the polyglot poet Dr. Srikanth Krishnamurthy. Metric verse stands out as an appealing and enduring medium for the expression of Bharatiya thought, be it in the hymns of the Veda, epic and devotional poetry, or treatises on the sciences and arts encompassing both Shastra and Kāvya. To cap a multifaceted discussion on Chandas today, we have none other than Dr. Nagaraj Paturiji, Senior Director and Chief Curator of Indica. As I invite you all for the feast that is to come, it seems fitting to express the concept of this symposium in metric verse 2. Chandamsi jatani pura shrutibhya, chandobhivridhya kavita vibhuti, chando maya shastra katha prasangaha, chandassu nandantu kala rasagnaha. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speakers of today. We have Shri Lalita Rupanaguriji, who's an engineer by profession and training, who has been a student of Sanskrit for more than 2 decades. After basic training in school and college, she has been fortunate to be associated with Samskrita Bharati during her formative years as a student and later as a volunteer. She has been part of Shatavadhani Dr. R. Ganesh's study circle for over a decade and a half, and Padyapana since its inception. A published author of literary reviews, she enjoys writing stories in Kannada and composing thematic kāvyas in Sanskrit. She has donned the role of a prachaka in Avadhanas in various departments like Dattapadi, Kāvya Vachana, and Ashu Kavita. She pursues Karnataka music under the tutelage of Vidushi Dr. T.S. Satyavati, works for ARM. Presenting along with her is Shri Raghuvaṃśa Hebbalaluji, an engineer by training and profession. He's a lifelong student of Sanskrit, has been associated with Samskrita Bharati as a student and a karyakarta, having conducted Sambhashana Shibirams in the USA and India. He has a master's in Sanskrit from Karnataka Samskrita University, Bengaluru. He evinces a keen interest in Bharatiya and Western philosophy. He has been fortunate to be part of Shatavadhani Dr. R. Ganesh's study circle on Kāvya and Alankara-śāstra. Associated with Padyapana as an on and off contributor, he enjoys composing verses about modern themes in classical meters in Sanskrit and Kannada, posting frequently on Twitter. He has participated in several avadhanas as a prachaka across categories. He is currently translating D.V. Gundappa's magnum opus Manku Thimmana Kagga from Kannada to Sanskrit. He and his wife Shri Lalita have translated another great work of DVG, Jivana Dharma Yoga, from Kannada to English. He has blogged in the past and is set on starting again. He works for McAfee. Their presentation today is titled The Rhythm of Chandas, a Practical Demonstration.
Thank you, Arvind. And while the presentation of Shri Lalita ji and Raghavendra ji come up, for those who have joined us, we welcome, time permitting, questions and answers in the Q&A box, written questions. We request that the questions be specific to what the scholars have presented today. And Arvind, have an eye out on the Q&A and figure out which one we would want to take on. Thank you. Over to you, Shri Lalita ji.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Om Tat Sat. We will start off with a couple of verses to indicate the beginning of the session here. Kutova Nutanam Vastu, Vayamut Prekshitum Kshamaha, Vacho Vinyasa Vichitriyam Astiveti Vicharyata. Just modified Jayanta Bhatta's verse here. This is nothing new that we are stating. We just need to check if it is the way in which we are saying it is interesting. Na khyātilābha pūjārtham upanyāsam oyamucchate svabodha parishuddhyartham chandovit pādapankaja. It's a modification of Sri Sureshwaracharya's introductory verse in the Naishkarmya Siddhi. It is not for fame or profit that we are giving this lecture. It's just to clarify our own understanding at the feet, lotus feet of those who know Chandas. And a small verse of gratitude to our teacher, Shatabhani Dr. R. Ganesh. Namaschando vide tasmai Ganesh Aryaya dhimate gurukalpaya usmakam balanam laghu chetasa. And acknowledgements to Indica and the Center of Bharatiya Languages, and to Shri Megha Kalyan Sundaram and Shri Arvind Iyer for curating such an interesting session on Chandas and for including us as well. And let's get started.
This is going to be the overview of our talk today. We'll briefly introduce Chandas and quickly move on to Satana Chandas, and then talk about, demonstrate the Vitana Chandas, and then conclude the talk.
Chandas, the word itself, has various meanings if you look up apte. In addition to being the addition to the Vedas, the meter, metrical science of prosody, it also means several other things. But what we are looking at mainly is, look at the three meanings on the right: the apavarane, samvarane, and urjane. It is, something that compensates for emptiness in poetic expression or to cover poetic deficiency, and also to energize. We will see all aspects of it as we cover our presentation. For all practical purposes, you can call it a fixed arrangement of laghus and gurus. And obviously, as Sri Arvind Iyer brought out earlier, it's an inseparable part of classical poetry.
Now, why is Chandas required? We'll briefly look at some points that might be important here. First of all, Chandas enhances poetic beauty. Each Chandas might come with its own innate emotion, and it can buttress the emotion that the poet wants to convey. And secondly, the rhyme can also, the prasa can be used in conjunction with Chandas and give a very good Shruti Saukhya, which is not possible in Gadya. For instance, you can think of the way Muthuswami Dikshita brings out he makes the prasakshara the same as the anuprasa that he uses, especially in the Madhyamakala Sahitya, which brings out a lot of beauty in the Madhyamakala Sahitya. In addition, the beauty of the language can be leveraged by versification. As Sri Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta says, only those chandases which which are natural to a language live and thrive. So it is only natural that the beauty of the language can be leveraged by using chandas. And there is a minimum guarantee with versification, even if there is very little alankara and very little poetic brilliance. A verse in proper chandas will give a minimum guarantee of beauty. And as DVG says, Kavana Nenapige Sulabha. Its verses are easy to remember. If you think about it, this is how the Vedas were transmitted over millennia through the vehicles of Anushtup, Trishtup, Jagati, Gayatri, among various other chandases. And constraints inspire creativity. When there is a constraint like chandas imposed on the writing, we think of new ways to express the same idea. So there are more creative expressions. And however, we still rely on the language for poetic beauty. There is no substitute for the Kavi's pratibha. So in this talk, we are going to focus on the meters outside the Vaidika canon.
So we'll start off with a high-level classification of chandas. Satana and Vitana, what Chandamsi with innate musical tempo and Chandamsi without innate musical tempo form the Satana and Vitana. And in the Satana verse part, we have Matragati and Karshanagati. We will see what that is in the next part of it. And in the Vitana, also there are two parts, Vritta and Akshara-jati. Vritta is something with a fixed Guru and Laghu position. And Akshara-jati, Jati is something that is Ekadesha Sthira, as you see on the definition on the right side. That is something, is an anonymous verse from Dandi's quoted in Kāvya Darsha. Some part is fixed, whereas Everything else is left free. That is something that is a jati, and it is to Sediapu's genius that came up with the definition for Akshara Jati. We will talk a little more about it later, but this is a wonderful classification of Chandas, which it comes from Sediapu, and of course through tradition as well.
We'll next go over to the Satana Chandas. Satana Chandas, as the name itself suggests, follows a beat. If you think of Lavanis and other folk songs, they all have an innate tempo. All of them in say ganas of 3 and 4, like Trikala, Chatushkala, Panchakala, and so on. In the interest of time, I'll just present one Panchakala meter. It is a famous Ashtapadi by Jayadeva. Vadasi yadi kinchidapi dantaruchiko mudi harati dharati miramati ghoram. We can see how the groups of 5 stands out. Actually, the ear can discern only ganas of 3, 4, and maximum 3, 4, 5, and maximum 7. Beyond that it becomes a repetition of 3, 4, 5, and 7 again. So which is why Trikala, Chatushkala, Panchakala, Saptakala are so common. Among them, groups of 4 matras are very popular, which is why all Arya meters have ganas of 4 matras. And since it's musical, it's a favorite for poets and musicians. And since there is no specific combination of laghus and gurus specified, it's suitable for narration as well, because it gives a lot of freedom for the poet. We now quickly go with the Karshana Chandas, or Amsha Chandas, as B.M. Shri called it. This is a meter that is used in Kannada and Telugu. So it has 3 kinds of ganas, Brahma, Vishnu, and Rudra ganas, with 4, 6, and 8 matras respectively. They are called Kama, Rati, and Bana in Sanskrita. Brahma Gana has 4 matras. 4 matras, which is Nana. It can't be Nana Nana, but it is only Nanana or Nana or similar to that. Similarly, Vishnu Gana can be Nananana, which is 6 matras. Now, it will be clear when we look at the Sangatya and Tripadi. The Sangatya verse that we've written down here is Kālavan illashtu polu madade karyashīlanagiddondu ghalige Kālannu chachi mai marevagale banda meladhikariyu balige. Now, if you look at the grouping here, some of them have 4 matras, some of them have 5 matras. How do we fit it into the Vishnu? The Lakshana of Sangatya says that it is Vishnu, 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 and Vishnu, Vishnu, Brahma, right? So how do we fit it? It has to be sung. It cannot be read out. To demonstrate that, ಕಾಲವನೆಳ್ಳಷ್ಟು ಪೋಲು ಮಾಡದೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಶೀಲನಾಗಿದ್ದೊಂದು ಘಳಿಗೆ ಕಾಲನ್ನು ಚಾಚಿ ಮೈ ಮರೆವಾಗಲೇ ಬಂದ ಮೇಲಧಿಕಾರಿಯು ಬಳಿಗೆ. So if you see the kalava, which is only 4 matras, has the la and va both elongated and becomes 6 matras. That is how Sangatya has to be sung. And coming to Tripadi, as the name itself suggests, there are 3 lines, but the second line, the first part of the second line is sung twice, and the last word joins during the second repetition. So it gives the feel of a 4-line verse. Here again, Salava Kombaga Haloga Rumbante, Saliga Bandu Selevaga, Kibbadi Kilu Muridante Sarvagnya. This just reads like prose. However, the way we sing it, Salava Kumbaga Haloga Rumbante Saliga Bandu Selevaga Saliga Bandu Selevaga Kibbadi Kilu Muridante Sarvagnya. So, by the elongation of specific letters in the Sagatya and Tripadi, it becomes musical. There are other chandases also like Sisapadya, Atavaladi, and Tetagiti, which are also Karshana chandas. And then we have Panchamatra, Chaupadi, and Panchamatra, Chaupadi, Bhavini, Shatpadi, and others are Matra chandas. Now we quickly go over the Arya family of chandas. It is the most prevalent after Anushtup and Upajati. And especially if you look at Kannada literature, about 50% of all metrical poetry is Kanda, which is Kandhaka of Arya. And since the Laghu and Guru positions are not really fixed, it's suitable for narration. In the Kathasarit Sagara, we have various instances where the protagonists of various stories go and propitiate Devis with Aryas. And for examples, we can see the brilliant Arya Shatakam, which is by far the most brilliant Aryas that I've ever seen. There are various variants of the Arya family of chandas. Arya Giti, and Udgiti, Upagiti. We'll not look at the last two. In general, these three, we'll just look at these 3 meters. Arya Giti and Arya Giti all have 12 matras in the first and third padas. And in the second and fourth padas, they have variously 15, 18, 15, or 20 matras. The third 4 matra group in the second and fourth padas should be, it can either be a Jagana, Nanana, or it can also be a Sarvalaghu. But it is mandatory that while Yati after the first Guru, first Laghu is appreciated, it is mandatory with when the this Gada is a Sarvalaghu. However, with this explanation given, is it possible to recite it or forget versify it? It's even difficult to recite this. It's even difficult to, thank you. It's even difficult to recite this verse. However, once we sing it, the Gati becomes very familiar to us, and it even becomes easy to versify. For example, in the interest of time, let me just go to the Giti verse here, which is the first verse of the Arya Shataka. Karana para chidrupa kanchi purasimni kama pithagata kachana viharati karuna kashmirastabaka komalangalata. Karana para chidrupa kanchi purasimni kama pithagata Kachana viharati karuna kashmirastabaka komalangalata. This is how my mother-in-law was taught by her grandmother. There is famous Omkara Panjara Shukim, the Shyamala Navaratna Malika Stotram. So this was the style in which she taught my mother-in-law how to sing this, and then suddenly realized that this is Arya indeed. If you see the Kanchi Pura Simni Kama, so Simni Kama is the Jagana, and you see a Yati also there. Then quickly going to the Arya Giti, it is famous as Skandhaka or Kandapadya in Kannada. This is the first verse of Keshi Raja's Shabdamani Darpana. This is how Ganesh sir always sings his Kandapadyas. Shri Vagdevige Shabdadinava Vindriyada Vishayamam Shrotradaludbhavipa Nirmala Murti Gilavandyege Shastra Mukhadola Vanatanappem. So here again we can see the now Indriyada, at Indriyada we see the Yati. So that brings us to the end of the Satana Chandas. Without much ado, let's go to Vitana Chandas.
Thank you. So we just talked about the Vrittas and the Akshara Jati. We will get into Vrittas are those which are fixed in Laghu and Guru positions. And then Jati, as we just spoke earlier, are those where it is Ekadesha Sthira Jati. So fixed only in certain aspects. And we will start looking at one of each of these. And of course, if you look at the Vrittaratnakara, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different vrittas. But we are focusing on just a few and just show how the Vidhana Chandas adds a lot of poetic rhythm. And Vidhana Chandas is a special feature of Sanskrit and other Bharatiya languages. So it is not easy to do these in other languages as well. And of course, as Sri Lalita already pointed out, the meters and the languages kind of choose each other. Without further ado, let's get into Vasanta Tilaka. The Vasanta Tilaka is actually a very versatile meter. And before singing anything, it's actually, of course, the lakshana of each of those is brought out in a lot of these details. But for practicing versifiers and to enjoy the prosodic beauty, you don't need to, always look at Ukta Vasanta Tilaka Tabada Jagauga. Rather than that, na 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 na. By using these na 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 na, which are independent of poetic, beauty. For example, nana, you can just focus on the Chandas rhythm itself. And this specific meter has no yati other than at the end of a pada that can actually end with a laghu. And as you can see, it is actually a balance of both laghus and gurus and a balanced madhyagati itself. And because of this madhyagati, it is, you look at any language for like Sanskrit or Kannada, there it is not always laghus or always gurus that you get. It's actually a mix of both. And the balanced madhyagati brings out the natural idiom of such a language. And Vasanta Tilaka brings that out very beautifully. And of course, as Sri Arvind pointed out, it's what you call the Suprabhatam meter. And the usage of that Suprabhatam meter was, can be traced back all the way to this particular verse that Kālidāsa brings in his waking of Aja. Actually, you can look at the verse itself. Ratrir gata matimatam varabhuncha shayyam dhatrad vidhaiva nanudhur jagato vibhakta tame katastava vibharti gurur vinidrastasya bhavan aparadhurya padavalambi. You can actually sing, this actually gives a lot of energy. And that is the reason why you can see almost all the Pratasmarana stotras follow Vasanta Tilaka. And for some very good examples, in addition to the Pratasmarana stotras, you can read Appaya Dikshita's Varadaraja-stava, Nilakantha Dikshita's Anandasagar-stava, and our own Dr. Shankar's Bhāravatā-stava for some really lovely examples to appreciate the beauty of Vasanta Tilaka. From Vasanta Tilaka, we will move on to the melancholy Mandakranta. The reason I've affixed the name is for people to remember that Mandakranta is a slow dragging out, as you can see that, right? It has strong yatis while Vasanta Tilaka did not have yatis. Mandakranta has strong yatis at 4 and 10 at the end of the pada, and you can see the 4 distinct regions: na 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 na. Na 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 na. You can see a guru heaviness in the beginning, na 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 na, and a druta in the middle, na 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 na. It actually goes a little faster, and a balance with more gurus towards it, na 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 na. Then the overall effect, however, is one of a slow drawing out, and that is apt for Shanta, Karuna, and Vipralam Vishrangara. And of course, who else to express it than Kālidāsa through his immortal Meghaduta. Kaschit Kanta Viraha Guruna Svadhikarat Pramattaha Shape Nastang Gamita Mahima Varsha Bhogyena Bhartuhu Yakhash Chakre Janakatanaya Snana Punyoda Keshu Snigdhachaya Turusha Vasatim Ramagirya Sarveshu. This is, you see how the whole, the 3 bhagas brings out the pathos so beautifully. And of course, in Sanskrit, all the chandams are derived from one another. So adding a laghu and a guru at the beginning of a Mandakranta can, results in a meter called Megha Vispurjita, with the yati position shifting by 2. And this is also related to the Shalini family also. From melancholy Mandakranta, we move to what is called Peaky Shikharani. Shikhara itself is a peak, and Shikharani gives you the peak experience. So look at the way it starts, right? Nanana Shivasaktya Yukto Yadivavati Shakta Prabhavitum, which is the opening verse of the Saundarya Lahari. Shivasaktya Yukto. It takes off after the first laghu. Shivasaktya, the take off, and then it stays at the peak. Nana, nana, na 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 na. It stays there. That's probably why our seers use the name Shikharani for the meter. And of course, this because of the hard yati at the sixth position, and also possibilities at 12 and 13, you can have it marks three kind of regions. It's a vilamba at the beginning, Shivas Shaktya Yukto, then Yadi Bhavati Shakta, Yadi Bhavati is the Durtagati, Shakta Prabhavitum is a Lagurich Madhyamagati at the end. And like Mandakranta itself, it's apt for Karuna, Shanta, and Vipralamba Shringara. And it's seen less in narration because it is in narration, you need more natural words, idiomatic words, not the sadhya words that poets coin. And this is one thing that you can see, observe in these meters. And that's why it's used more in stotras and of course in muktakas. For example, the one that you see here, Yada Kinchit Yoham Dvipa Eva Madandhas Samabhavam Tada Sarvagnyosmi Tyaba Bhava Davariptam Mamamana Yada Kinchit Buddha Jana Sakasha Davagatam Tadha Murkosmi Tijvara Eva Mado Me Vyapakataha. And there are more beautiful examples in Saundarya Lahari and Ganga Lahari. From this, let us move to the sublime Shardula Vikridita. And this is the 19-syllabled play of the tiger. You can see why it's a play. It does not have hard, it does have yatis, but they're not hard as like in Mandakranta or in Shikharani. And it's a very guru-heavy Madhyamagati. And it's versatile, beautifully versatile, and it can yield, use both, very highly compounded words, very high samasa bhuishta words, as well as bit words. It gives you a natural idiom of Sanskrit. That's why it is very suitable for Muktakas, descriptions, and Dhyana shlokas. Typically, most Dhyana shlokas, if you look at either Durga Saptashti or other parts, they feature Dhyana shlokas, Gita Dhyana shloka, also Yam Brahma, Varunendra, Ruddha, Marutastunvanti, Divestavi. All of those are featured in Shardula Vikridita. And of course, and the one verse that is shown here, I will not have the time to read through it. You see that the first half of it shows small words, Tutchamopi, Jarakrushopi, Apannopi, all of those in the first half, whereas the big samasa is brought in the third. Matte Bhendra Vibhinna Kumbha Vijita Grasaiga Baddhaspraha. That is the one entire, the one samasa fits the pada. That is the beauty of Shardula Vikridita. And of course, for reasons of parasa, Adiparasa, the first syllable has been split into two, yielding Matteva Vikridita. It's a very popular verse. Actually, more than Shardula Vikridita, Matteva Vikridita is probably more popular. And for if you want to read more of these, look at Bhartrhari's Shatakas. Those are brilliant examples of the Shardula Vikridita. From here, we will go into the Akshara Jatis, which is Upajati. Upajati is a mix of Upendra Vajra. There's a small typo here, but that's fine. Upendra Syadin na 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 Syadindra Vajra Yadito Jago Upendra Vajra Jadastato Go. So Upendra Indra Vajra starts with all laghus. Upendra Vajra starts with one laghu and starts with the guru. And because of the changes in the first four padas, you can actually have 16 possibilities, all four laghus with all four gurus, and in the middle 14 possible combinations are possible, and there is a gurus across, but this guru dominated Madhyamagati is the feature. Yati is felt after the first five. For example, Karpura Gauram, Karunavataram, Samsara Saram, but it's not mandatory. Not all follow it though. For example, you can see the first of the Astutasayam Devatā. It does not follow this particular rule here. And also, it is also possible to sing it, in a Khandagati. Though it's by elongation, it's possible to sing the same in Khandagati. By themselves, Upendra Vajra and Indra Vajra can become monotonous, but with Upajati, there's a lot of good mix. And the Upendra Vajra takes off, and the beautiful taking off is seen in the descent and ascent are marked in Kālidāsa's famous verse itself. For example, Astyuttarasyam is like na na na, it kind of descends, na na na, it kind of Astyuttarasyam, it descends, whereas in the next line, because you want to show the Himalayas peaks, you can Himalayo Nama, it actually takes off that way, right? So you can see how creatively poets have used a mix of both Indra Vajra and Upendra Vajra in Upajati. And of course, I think we know that Upajati probably came before all of these and from the Vedic Tishtup itself. Read loudly, read Raghuvaṃśa, the second skandha, and Sarga or the Kumar Sambhava first Sarga for some lovely Upajati verses, and also Vivek Chudamani. And from this,
fascinating, but 3 minutes, Raghavji.
3 minutes, yes. And we have the all-round Anushtup, which is probably the live link across the Vaidika Purana, Kāvya-śāstra, and probably the oldest active meter. It's again another Akshara Jati. The definition of this, though it's a very simple 8x4, it is difficult to capture the definition. The famous definition, Panchamam Laghu Sarvatra Saptamam Vichaturthayoho, fails in the same examples that we see in the beginning. Vālmīki's first verse of the Rāmāyaṇa, it does not fit this particular definition. Tapas Svadhyaya Niratam, it just breaks it there. Or Tadanvaya Shuddhimati, it breaks it there. So what is the rule really, right? So we'll go to the rule in the next slide, but there are other rules here which, avoid 3 laghus at the beginning of all padas and avoid the nanana, the laghu, the 2 laghus, and basically a third position laghu should be kind of avoided in even padas. It gives you a good gati for the anushtup. And let's and here madhyama gati with mostly gurus, and there's a lot more freedom than in other meters, right? So because that is why it led to Kshemendra making this observation in the Suvritta Tilaka, because you saw all the different exceptions in Vālmīki and Kālidāsa. It is Shravyataya Pradhanata. So basically, this is gained more in Shravyataya to the listening of this. And actually, I would like to direct you to a beautiful series of articles by Shatavadhani and Dr. R. Ganesh that has come out on Preksha right now. And again, because of the limiting of the laghus or gurus, it can actually go up from 42 matras to maximum of 58 matras. Look at just an 8x4, you can actually change it so much, right? And you can sample the variety of gati, okay? You can go from the Rudra Prashna, Namaste Rudra Manyava Utoda Ishave Namaha, Namaste Astudhanvane Bahubhya Mutate Namaha. That is the Vaidika, that is, look at the gati in that versus something in the Aditya Hridaya, Tato Yuddha Parishrantam Samare Chintayasthitam Rāvaṇaṃ Jagrato Dashtva Yuddhaya Samupasthitam, or all gurus in the beginning, in this one of my favorite verses of the Gita, Matras Parshastu Kaunteya Chitoshta Sukhadukkadaha Agamapayano Nityastāns Śikṣā Bharata, or Kālidāsa himself, which again brings up a different one, Vaivaspato Manunama Mananiyo Manishanam Asin Mahikshita Madhya Pranava Chandas. It is because of this non-boring kind of a thing that is Anushtup is used extensively across Puranas for descriptions and Shastras everywhere, which leads to Kshemendra making this particular observation, and especially for Shastra, because Shastra is an important part of Samskrita Vāngmaya. Shastram kuryat prayatnena prasannartham Anushtupa. So Shastra, if you want to do something, and you can see this across all of the important Shastras, Upadesha Haste, Naishkarmi Siddhi, they feature verses mainly from Anushtup. And also, Purana Pratibimbeshu, Pasannopaya Vartmasu, Upadesha Pradhaneshu, Kuryat, Sarvesh Anuštubham, Viduraniti, all of those are, they feature Anushtup highly. And with this, we're coming to an end. See, we know not all combinations of laghus and gurus are enjoyable. It is our great, predecessors who actually gone into the world of the language and brought these out beautifully. And Chandovibhyo, Mahadbhyo Maha. And before we end it, we just like to show some references at the end. There is, of course, Sediyapa Chandas Samputa, and that's something Chandogati that Shashikiran will talk about. And Chandovibheka is another beautiful work that is going to be published. There's also a couple of articles here, and for those interested, we have lessons at Pantipana, these 2 works. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to go through this very fast tour through Chandas. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you so much for also finishing on dot. That's amazing.
Very metrically timed.
While Arvind brings up the information about our next speaker, I'll request our PECPS presenters to unshare their slides. Great. Thank you. Over to you, Arvind.
We'll hear from GSS Murthy now, who is a postgraduate in telecom engineering at from IISc Bangalore, and joined Indian Telecom Services Government of India and retired as advisor operations to the Department of Telecommunications Government of India. Studied Sanskrit under traditional scholars as an extracurricular activity during student days and resumed Sanskrit studies after retirement. A collection of his Sanskrit poems under the title Chandrika has been published. So also his translation of Ibsen's Dollhouse under the title Putrika Griham. His Kannada translation of Sri Vedanta Deshika's Subhāṣita has been published by Academy of Sanskrit Research, Melukote. He has written programs in Java for Sanskrit Sandhi and identifying Sanskrit meters. He has published 3 papers in the area of Sanskrit Chandas, 2 in the Annals of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, and 1 in Prachi Prajna. His presentation today is on modern explorations into the ancient Sanskrit world of Chandas. Over to you.
GSSG, I request you to please share your presentation and get started. Thank you.
My screen sharing is wrong.
Yes, we need to see
Wait,
your
I'll
presentation.
redo it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
You may go for full screen.
Namaskar.
We tried it, Nagaraj Garu. There's an issue with the full screen part. We tried it during the testing. So let's proceed with the way it is right.
Okay.
So I proceed. Namaskar.
Yes, please proceed.
Namaskar, dear co-speakers, viewers and listeners. My greetings to you all for the New Year Shobhana. At the outset, I thank the founder of Indica institutions, Shri Hari Kishan Vatlamani Garu, and the organizers of the Symposium, Indica Center for Bharatiya Languages. In particular, Dr. Nagaraj Paturi, Dr. Meg Kalyan Sundaram, and Dr. Aravind Iyer for having given me an opportunity to address you. With your kind indulgence, I dedicate this talk of mine to the memory of late Dr. Ramakant Shukla, who passed away last March. He was a reputed Sanskrit and Hindi scholar, poet, and a publisher of Sanskrit books. He was my mentor in the field of Sanskrit poetry. Let me say a few words about the title of this talk. The title mentions of ancient world of Sanskrit Chandas. Chandas is one of the 6 Vedāṅgas. It deals with the meter employed in the Vedas. Although this talk does not cover Vedic Chandas, the classical Chandas employed in classical Sanskrit texts is a direct descendant of Chandas Vedāṅga. It is in fact an ancient world. The first treatise on Chandas was written by Acharya Pingala, who perhaps lived around 100 or 200 BC. Pingala's work is thorough and comprehensive. Later works on Chandas written by various scholars mostly tried to explain and simplify Pingala's work, which was written in a terse and brief sutra style. Around 11th or 12th century, more than 1,000 years after Pingala, Kedara Bhatta brought out a book, Vrittaratnakara, a primer on Chandas, which virtually covered in a lucid manner all the topics dealt with by Pingala. The distinguishing feature of Rudraratnakara is that the verse defining a meter is composed in the same meter. Later authors followed this style. The words modern explorations denote my studies on Chandas during the last 20 or more years. In my attempt to write a program for identifying Sanskrit Vrittas, I ran into difficulties in the case of Anushtup. My studies in Pingala and Kedar Patta led me to the surprising conclusion that what is called Anushtup remains ill-defined. Most of Rāmāyaṇa, Mahabharata and Puranas are composed in Anushtup, and it could be the most used poetic meter among all languages in the world. It is indeed strange that it has remained a vaguely or insufficiently defined meter for so long. Then the question arises, how have poets composed Anushtup without knowing its characteristics? The answer could be the inherent rhythm or cadence of a meter. This inherent rhythm, which is ingrained in a poet's mind, with repeated listening and reciting, helps him or her to compose correctly. What exactly is this rhythm is yet a mystery. I shall deal with this in some detail later. Before we delve into the details, let's quickly get to know the elements of some prosody. There is no harm if there is repetition, as it helps retention. A short vowel, Hrasvasvara, is assigned the duration of 1 matra. It is called Lagu. A long vowel, Dirghasvara, Anusvara or Visarga, assigned the duration of 2 matras and is called Guru. The last syllable of a verse line is also taken as 2 matras. A consonant is taken to be of 0 matra duration. A short vowel, when immediately followed by a samyuktakshara, namely compound consonant, is assigned a duration of 2 matras. This is a remarkable rule which is not at all obvious, and whoever determined this rule in the hoary past merits to be called the father of Sanskrit Chandas. In Sanskrit, there are 3 broad categories of meters: Akshara-gana-based meters, Matra-gana-based meters, and syllable-based meters. We shall soon see what an Akshara-gana is. Poets of classical Sanskrit have composed kāvyas utilizing mostly these Akshara-gana meters, like Mandakranta, Indravajra, etc. Verses composed employing Matra-gana-based meters can be seen in Sanskrit dramas and mostly in Prakrit works. Syllable-based verses are where a line of verses has a fixed number of syllables. The only meter of this type is Anushtup, which we are going to discuss soon. When I talk of Anushtup, I refer to the meter in which the vast body of Sanskrit text has been composed. Unfortunately, only a part of the vast body of Anushtup is covered by the definition given by Pingala, or for that matter, any other past prosodics. The definition is like a filter. You should allow most of whatever should pass through. You should not allow most of whatever should not pass through. Now let us get to know what this Akshara-gana is. In general, a line of words is a string of laghus and gurus. In order to specify and easily memorize which syllable is laghu or guru in a line of verse, our ancient prosodists have devised a 3-syllable coding system. There is a mnemonic, Yamata Rajamanasa. See, this is a circular sequence. Nasaya is Nagana. Sayama is Sagana. Bhanasa is Bhagana. It's like so on and so forth. A verse can be composed by specifying a sequence of Akshara-ganas. Now let us see what Matra-ganas mean. Now we shall see what Matra-ganas means. The duration of a sequence of syllables in Matras is sum total of the duration of each syllable in the sequence, and that duration specifies a Matra-gana. If a meter is specified in Matra-ganas, there is a certain amount of freedom in choosing actual syllables. If you specify a line of words, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, where 2 is 2 Matra-gana, it could be 2 or 1, 1. If Chagana is specified, which is total matra is 4, we have much greater possibilities. Akshara-gana based specification makes the meter rigid like a crystal. Matra Gana specification is amorphous. Matra Ganas of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are represented by Data, Cha, Pa, and Sha. Now we are going to study 3 topics. The first is characterizing the classical Anushtup. The second is introducing the concept of Tala and Laya. The third one is a very interesting subject of generating meters. Here are 3 typical and well-known verses of all in Anushtup. First is a prayer to the divinity. The second is an expression of pathos and anger felt by Vālmīki. The third was in lighter vein. If we have to decide whether a particular sloka is Anushtup or not, we have no way other than to depend on our innate sense of Anushtup rhythm. Although we as yet do not have an objective definition of rhythm, which arises out of the pattern of syllabic durations in a line of verse. But this innate rhythm enables a poet to compose without closely checking. It enables an experienced listener or reader to detect lapse of rhythm. Does familiarity provide the sense of rhythm? To some extent, perhaps yes, but to some extent not. It's the mechanics of rhythm we are going to explore here, and not its aesthetics. The elusive rhythm is the sutradhara of the 3 topics I am discussing. There are 2 well-known karikas which specify Anushtup in a similar manner, but these definitions are neither correct nor sufficient. I am not going to the details of how earlier definitions fall short of necessary and sufficient characterization. Anushtup has been defined by Pingala and Kedar Bhatta. Pingala's Pratyavatra is just a subset of Anushtup as we see in some texts. If we really study Anushtup slokas, we find that it has following characteristics. 4 padas of 8 syllables each. The padas 1 and 3 differ from padas 2 and 4. The first syllable and the last syllable of a pada could be lagu or garu. It doesn't matter. The remaining 6 syllables of a pada form 2 akshara-ganas in sequence. It is found that certain combinations only of these 2 ganas go to make an Anushtup. Acceptable combinations are marked in a table. This way of representing in a table is very illuminating. The horizontal rows represent 8 possibilities of syllables 2, 3, 4. Vertical columns represent 8 possibilities of syllables 5, 6, 7. Combinations marked 0 are acceptable for odd padas, and marked E are acceptable for even. A pair of shlokas defines these combinations. The definition arrived at accounts for most of Anushtup texts encountered. Details may be seen in my paper, which I will refer to later. Here are some examples in Vishampada. Some are acceptable, some cannot be accepted. Sarakshati Ramanatha is fine. Sarakshati Madhuripuhu is not okay. In Samapada also, Shargadanva Kripanidhihi is fine. Janardana Kripanidhihi doesn't meet the requirement. This table consolidates the 16 permissible combinations for padas 1 and 3 and 5 combinations of padas 2 and 4. Thus, 80 possibilities exist for an Anushtup. Now, this gives some food for thought. In this study, it is not the solution offered which is of importance. It is identifying that a problem exists and delineating that problem. Why is it that Anushtup has 8 syllables? What is special with 8? Can we construct Anushtup like meters having 7, 9, 10, or 11 syllables? Of course, Vedic meter Trishtup has 11 syllables. Can we come up with an objective definition of Anushtup rhythm? These are things to be thought over. For further details, my paper please be referred. Now we go to the second concept, second subject, concept of Tala and Laya. Intuitively, one can say that if successive aksharas in a pada of a verse could be grouped into small segments, each group having the same duration and ending in a vowel, one could perceive a beat of constant duration leading to a sense of rhythm. That means that if a pada could be broken down into segments of equal matras, matra ganas, a rhythm beat could be perceived. An example is the famous hymn of Sri Shankaracharya, Bhaja Govindam, which is composed in a meter based on matra ganas. It has a beat which anyone can discern. Bhaja Govindam, Govindam, Bhaja Mudamate, Samprapte, Sanite, Sale, Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukri Karne. It can be a little examination to show that it can be broken down into single silver segments of duration 4 matras, as can be seen in this slide. It is also observed that a step of 2 or 3 matras at the end will not affect the overall rhythm of the line and often improves the quality of the rhythm. In a similar manner, would verses based on varna ganas be broken down into matra ganas so that such a structure based on matra ganas provides a beat for the verse. For any beat to be perceived, it should be possible to break the pada into at least 2 segments of equal duration with or without a stub remaining. Let us take Indravajra, a popular method based on Akshargana. If we want to study its beat structure, we need to get down to the syllabic level. We abandon the archaic Lagu Gudok symbols and represent Lagu by 1 and Guru by 2. In terms of Lagu and Guru, Indravajra is as seen in this slide, which we call the characteristic string of Indravajra. It can be split into 2 substrings of 9 matras each. We also see there an internal structure 22122, which occurs in both the substrings. We say that Indravajra exhibits a tala of 9 matras with a laya 22122. The characteristic string of Indravajra can also be split into a tala of 7 matras with a laya 223. We can synthesize a string which has a tala of 9 matras which is given laya, and a tala of 7 matras which is laya, and a stub of 2-2. It turns out that the string synthesized called Prakrita here is slightly different from the characteristic string of Indravajra. It means that tala and laya of Indravajra are insufficient to capture its rhythm. Tala specifies the periodicity in a line of verse, and laya specifies the instance of pause within a period. With the help of a computer program developed, tala and laya structure of more than 300 meters have been worked out and given as a table in the paper refer. Summing up this topic, one can say that the opacity of the age-old Akshargana system has been an obstacle for studying in detail the beat structure inherent in meters. By directly studying the characteristic strings of meters, one can discover the beat structure of meters through the twin concepts of tala and laya. It is hoped that this work, based on an out-of-the-box approach, will open a new and rich area for further exploration in Sanskrit prosody. Now, we take up the third and the last topic, namely generation of new meters. The rhythmic essence of a set of meters can be captured and encapsulated in what is called an adjacency table. It generates not only the meters on which the table is based, but also other recognized meters as well as a large number of entirely new rhythmic meters. While in the previous approach of Tala and Laya, we looked at the level of syllables, which is so to say a bottom-up approach. In this top-down approach, we look at the level of substrings, treating them as rhythm elements. This approach is best studied using an example. A person familiar with Sanskrit meters would be aware that several of the meters end in a similar manner. To avoid dealing with bland and boring binary sequences comprising 1 and 2, we shall use standardized Sanskrit phrases. Obviously, our interest is only in the prosodic content of the phrase, not its semantic content. So here are 4 vrittas, all different: Shalini, Malini, Bhujanga, Priyatam, Manda, Kranta. But they have a common end, Madhvare, Pai, Shauri. All the above populars are end in a common phrase. It goes without saying that this 7-syllable long phrase contributes significantly to the rhythmic quality of these meters. One cannot also fail to notice that certain phrases are repeatedly employed. In fact, these 4 meters are made up of the following 5 phrases only: Kamsare, Madhumutana, Hare, He, and Madhvare, Pai, Shaure. It is to be stressed that these phrases integrally participate in the perception of the rhythm of each of the meters without violating accepted points of pause, whether prescribed or not. We treat these 5 phrases of rhythm elements and based on these 4 meters, which we shall call base meters, work out what would be the rules which these rhythm elements should follow in these 4 rhythmic lines of verse. In order to explore further, we set up what we call an adjacency table, which is a convenient way of recording which phrase comes after which phrase in these 4 meters. What we have called here adjacency table is in fact an adjacency matrix in the mathematics of graphs. The syntax of languages, natural or artificial, can be represented by directed graphs where each category of words forms a node. The syntax or grammar of the rhythm element, which is brought out by the adjacency table, can also be visually represented by a directed graph as shown here. We can construct meters, which are the analog of sentences, by following the permissible sequences in figure 1. What we are trying to do here is to work out a syntax for rhythm, taking the rhythm elements as grammatical parts of speech. The method of using an adjacency table to construct meters is based on the premise that preserving the adjacency observing a closely related set of rhythmic meters ensures that any meter so constructed is also rhythmic. Each rhythm element has an affinity to certain other elements in becoming their neighbor. And this affinity is so to say captured in the adjacency table. From a set of only 4 related meters, we have constructed an adjacency table. And this adjacency table yields 18 different meters, out of which 4 are the base meters, 4 are meters recognized, which includes Ṛgveda, and the remaining 10 are new meters. It's our contention that the 10 new meters are as big as the 4 new meters. The various steps detailed for Madhvare Paishore group have been worked out for 3 more groups, each group being denoted with the spine rhythm element, Madho Pahimam, Daya Chalnide, Daya Jalanide, and Keshu Paigane. For a given set of meters in a group, the set of rhythm elements is not unique. Future research efforts could lead to getting rid of this subjective element in choosing the set. To recapitulate, we have discussed 3 topics in the area of Sanskrit Chandas. The first one was our discovery that there has been no comprehensive definition of Anushtup so far, at least ever since Vālmīki's famous outpourings in Anushtup. We have provided a suitable definition. Secondly, we have enunciated the new concepts of Tala and Laya and indicated how the twin concepts provide a new perspective. Thirdly, we have discussed a new method of generating new meters based on a set of cognate vrittas using the concept of adjacency table. Whatever I have talked about is the result of an idler's wanderings in the landscape of Chandaḥ-śāstra. It has made a trial worth pursuing is for others to say. Joy partly aesthetic and partly intellectual, that the wanderer's experiments in his wanderings has been immense. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, GSS Murthy ji, for not just sharing your insights, but also providing references for people who would like to dive deeper into your papers and for introducing aspects of some of your original findings from them. I also appreciate you maintaining time. Thank you so much. We will now proceed to the next presentation. Before that, if there are any questions for any of our speakers, as mentioned earlier, we invite written questions in the Q&A box, and we request that the questions be specific to the presentation. So we'll keep an eye out on that if there are any questions coming in from there. In the meanwhile, Arvind, I'll request you to introduce the next talk.
We look forward now to hearing Śikṣā BNG. Śikṣā BN holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in Sanskrit aesthetics. He works as a contributing editor of Preksha, an online journal of Indian culture and philosophy. He is a recipient of the prestigious Sahitya Akademi Prize 2021 for translation, which he received along with Shatabadhani Dr. R. Ganesh for their Sanskrit translation of Devudu Narasimha-Shastri's Mahabrahmana, which is a Kannada novel. His presentation today is on Chandogati, unraveling the beauty of poetic meters. Over to you, Śikṣā.
Thank you. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Om Devim Vācamajanayanta Devaha Tam Vishvarupah Pashavo Vadanti Sano Mandreshamurjan Duhana Dhenurva Gasmanu Pasuhtutaitu Sarvebhyo Namaha. At the outset, I would like to thank everyone at Indica, Megh Kalyan Sundaram ji, Nagaraj Paturi ji, Arvind Iyer ji, who for having me here. It gives me great pleasure to give this talk on Chandas, a topic that is close to my heart, a topic that is unfortunately not being discussed, not on the internet at any rate, in the manner and in the measure to which it deserves. So I'm happy to be here. Now, the topic of my discussion for today is Chandogati, a remarkable treatise authored in Kannada by Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta. Before going into the topic itself, I have one more thanks to offer, and this is to the speakers who presented before me, specifically to Sri Raghuvaṃśa Hebbaluluji and Srimati Srilalita Rupanagudi, because they had aspects from Sediyapu's work in their talk. They have made my job easier. I shall try to cover some other aspects which they did not have the time to cover in their course of their presentation. Now, before going into the topic itself, Chandogati, the treatise, I would like to speak a few words about the author of this remarkable work, Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta. Sediyapu was born in Karnataka. His name was Krishna Bhatt. Sediyapu happens to be the village in which he was born. And he was afflicted by many problems since childhood. He was not a well-to-do person, neither were his parents. They were all very poor. And Sediyapu had many physical difficulties and problems as well. In fact, he had eye problems to begin with from the time he was a child. And by the time he came into his 40s or 50s, he lost his eyesight altogether. So you can only imagine the kind of effort it takes to contemplate on a subject inside his head for years on end, for decades together, and come up with seminal works such as the Chandogati. Of course, Chandogati, he wrote it down with his own hand. Fortunately, he had his eyesight, though it was failing. Other works, he dictated it to his students. And he was a Kannada tutor by profession. Although he was a great scholar, he did not get a job that is commensurate with his prodigious learning because of his failing health and failing eyesight. He was employed as a tutor, which meant that he only had to correct the papers written by school children in their examinations. He was not even allowed to teach those students. So that was the pathetic state of affairs faced by Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta. He was also an Ayurvedic doctor. He practiced the Ayurveda. He taught the Vidya, Ayurveda Vidya to himself. And I will present just another detail of this fascinating scholar because it is very interesting. Because he did not have many resources at his disposal, he used whatever he had to the fullest extent. He had this small radio with him, and he used to listen to various stations or various programs that were broadcast in the Akashvani. And he would glean very subtle nuances of all those programs. For instance, if there would be a music program that was broadcast, he would glean from that program, by hearing or by listening to that program, nuances of pronunciation, how people pronounce similar words across various languages in India, how a Kannadiga pronounces a word, how a Telugu person pronounces a particular or the same word, how a Bengali pronounces, and so many other things like that. And he had this remarkable penchant for reading dictionaries. He had a fascination for V.S. Apte's English and Samskrita dictionary, and he had such a remarkable mastery over that text that after he went blind, he would, when he was looking for a word, for instance, he would call someone in his house and say, he would feel the book and open a particular page, and the word he would be looking for, he would instruct that person, look inside the third column in this particular page, you are very likely to find the word there. So that is the kind of mastery he enjoyed over even such works such as the dictionaries. He was a great master of Vyākaraṇa or grammar, Nirukta or the science of etymology, Sahitya-śāstra or poetics, aesthetics, Bhāṣā-śāstras, Sanskriti-śāstra, and so on. And because, like I said, he used to contemplate on various topics inside his head, and this led him to do manana, as our Shastrakaras enjoin us to do. Yuktibhir anachintanam mananam, it is said. When you understand a particular topic, in order to reinforce it for yourself before propagating it for the benefit of others, you will have to substantiate it by continuous reasoning, by thinking about it from various quarters of logical reasoning. That is what he used to do. And he had these three fundamental tenets for going about any piece of writing. So if anyone were to ask him, why do you go about writing? Why have you written this particular piece? He used to give out these three particular reasons. One is to say something new, something which no other person has said about this particular topic. And two, in order to extend the frontiers of a particular subject or a particular branch of learning. And three is to clarify. So it is for these three reasons, to say something new or extend the frontiers or to clarify. He says in so many words, Durvyakhya Vishamurchitan Vicharan Punasanjeevayitum iva. He says in so many words. So that is the high standard that Sediyapu set for himself, and it is to his credit that he has not written even a single word that does not fall into this standard, that does not follow this standard. And Namulam Likhyate Kinchin Nanapekshitam Uchyate, again the high standard set by Mallinatha Suri in his Vyākyanas on the Panchamaha Kāvyas. Sediyapu follows the same dictum. I shall not say anything that is not based on reasoning, that is not based on evidence, and Nanapekshitam Uchyate, neither shall I say anything that is frivolous or unwanted. He has authored several seminal works such as the Chandogati, which is the subject of our present discussion. Kannada Chandasu is a companion volume to this. Satya Darshana is a remarkable treatise on etymology, and it also gives insights into the Saraswati river. Kelavu Deshanamagalu is a work on etymology. Vichara Prapancha is a collection of his scholarly essays. Now, to come to the subject, Chandas, it would be instructive to understand how various scholars have treated this subject in ancient times and also in modern times. So if you look at ancient authors in their treatises written by from Pingala all the way to Kedara Bhatta and even modern authors, what we observe is that the ancient authors concerned themselves with Lakshya Lakshana Samanvaya. Primarily, of course, they had some other things to say as well, but their primary objective was Lakshya Lakshana Samanvaya. What does this mean? They had a broad corpus of works before them in the form of lakshyas or examples. They had works such as the Vedas or even poetic compositions, supposedly, which are no longer available due to the ravages of time. And in order to explain the nature of those compositions, they came up with various definitions. And they went about doing various iterations in order to match the lakshana perfectly to the lakshya. And if it would not match, they would go on refining the lakshana further and further so that it would be free from any flaws such as avyapti, ativyapti, etc. So this was the case with the ancients. Now, how have the modern scholars gone about treating this subject? It is in two ways. One is aitihasika adhyayana and the two is ganitiya adhyayana. We see these two broad categories in their approach to the subject. Because they have the privilege of accessing such a huge body of literature that is passed on from centuries, handed down to them by their tradition, they analyze this subject from a historical perspective. Which scholar has used this particular meter in which work for the first time? And Ganitiya Adhyayana, which scholar has used this meter how many times? It also gives an insight into the predilections of the poet as to various chandas, as to the employment of various poetic meters. And by using technological tools, especially in times like of ours in the 21st century, people have also done statistical analysis and have come up with fascinating tools. Now, be that as it may, in all these fields of study, we see there is a lacuna in that Chanda Saundarya Mimamsa, unraveling the beauty of poetic meters, has not been taken up adequately. Of course, scholars, ancient scholars such as Jayakirti or such as Kshemendra particularly, or even Bhojadeva passingly in his works such as Shringara Prakasha or Saraswati Kanthabharana, have had some interesting things to say about Chandas Saundarya, but it is not done in an adequate manner. Even modern scholars such as H.T. Velankar, Madhusudana Shastri Ojha have concerned themselves with this subject. Now, Chandas, broadly speaking, can be classified into three major aspects. One is Vritta, Matra Jati, and the third one is Karshana Jati or Karnata Vishaya Jati. Sri Lalita ji and Raghavendra Hebbalulu ji have already explained to all of you the lakshanas of all these three terms. And Sediyapu, to his credit, has dealt with all these three aspects in his two volumes. One is the Chandogati, the other is Kannada Chandasu. In Chandogati, he discusses Vritta and Matra Jati, and in his other work, Kannada Chandasu, he discusses Karshana Jati or Karnata Vishaya Jati, of which the examples include Sangatya, Tripadi, and so on. So he does this in tandem with Sangeeta-śāstra. So Chandaḥ-śāstra and Sangeeta-śāstra are termed as Samana Tantra in our tradition. So Sediyapu, while analyzing Chandas, draws parallels from Sangeeta-śāstra, uses those concepts from Sangeeta-śāstra, and even refers to seminal treatises of musicology such as Sangeeta Ratnakara, authored by Sharangadeva, and he comes up with fascinating discoveries within the ambit of Chandaḥ-śāstra itself. And to come to this particular work without further ado, Chandogatihi, it has 9 parichedas or 9 chapters, and the work is so structured, it is structured as a scientific treatise or even as a mathematical treatise, in that the author presents a hypothesis upfront and he adduces evidence for the hypothesis at every step, takes you together with him, reasons out and arrives at a result or a conclusion. So a result or a conclusion is not presented upfront as would be in a scientific treatise, but a hypothesis is presented and the author takes you on a tour of reasoning. So it is a very fascinating read. And also, you should read the text from one part to the next. You cannot skip the first part and even try to understand the next. It won't work that way. So if you try to read the chapter 7 without having read the chapter 6, chances are that you will find a naughty portion and you won't understand it. So this is how the text is structured. And he cites examples from various authorities of the tradition, such as the Amarakosha with the Sudha Vyākyaṇa, Jayakirti, his work Chandaḥ-śāstra, and of course from Pingala Sutra and the commentary thereon written by Halayudha, Sangeeta Ratnakara, like I just said. And he, staying true to the standards he has set for himself, he clarifies many portions within the Shastra as well. So what are the contents of this work? I shall briefly read out many of the subjects that he has dealt with. Because of paucity of time, I might not have the opportunity to go into everything in detail. Laya, Tala, Vritta, Jati, the definition of the word Chandas itself, the difference between Laya, which is a Bharatiya word, and rhythm, which is a Western word. People were using it without adequate discretion, and Sediyapu clarifies the meaning of those two words. Gati, the word Chando Gati, and Satana meters, Pitana meters, like Raghuvaṃśa Hebbalalu explained, and Akshara Gatis, and as discussed in various musicological treatises, the various Avarta Gatis, in that the Matra Bandhas have ganas which repeat, and to them Sediyapu gives the name Avarta Gati, and he discusses various poetic meters such as the Anushtup, Upajati, Udgata, Aryagiti, and so on. What is the Lakshana of the term Padya, and Yati, which is a poetic pause or Sesura, Chandaḥ Padagati, Bhasha Padagati. He comes up with many such new paribhashas himself. So let us look at a few of these concepts and try to understand. Sediyapu takes up the word Chandas for discussion in one place in the work. And what is the primary meaning of this very ancient word? Now we know that the word Chandas can mean the Vedas. The Vedas themselves are called Chandas. It also can mean one of the limbs of the Vedas, a Vedāṅga, Vedāṅgam Shastram api Chandaḥ. And it can also mean a verse, a poetic verse, Padya Bandha Vishesha. So among all these meanings, there are other meanings as well. What is the primary meaning? Because we are trying to evolve a Shastra out of it, we will have to have very clear understanding of the word itself. So Sediyapu comes up with this ingenious explanation. The meaning itself was known to us, but the explanation is very definitive. He says that a sequence of laghus and gurus, or a sequence of short and long syllables, that is the primary meaning of the word Chandas. Why? He gives this very good example. He says, take any three words that have the same number of letters and have the same number of matras. I'm sure all of you know what a matra is. It is a syllabic instant. He takes three words such as Ganesha, Madhava, and Kuchela. If you observe, all these three words have the same number of letters. Three letters in all these three words. And also the number of matras is also the same, 5 matras. In Ganesha, Madhava, and Kuchela, there are 3 letters and 5 matras. Then what accounts for their difference? What accounts for their difference is the sequence of laghus and gurus. In Ganesha, like you can see, it is laghu, guru, guru. In Madhava, it is guru, laghu, guru, and so on. Madhavaha, that is why it is guru, laghu, and guru, and so on. So this is the clinching evidence to settle the meaning of the word Chandas. And he goes on to define the word Gati as well, because the title of his work is Chando Gati. He has to define all those words that form components of the title of his work. And he defines Gati as Akarshika Chandas Saranihi. So Chandas Sarani is the sequence of short and long syllables, like as I said. And it is not just any sequence, but it is a captivating, it is a riveting, it is an arresting, it is a beautiful sequence of laghus and gurus. Akarshika Chandas Saranihi. And he comes up with further refinement of that definition. He says, but this Akarshakatva can be seen in prose as well. Let me give you an example. In Bhojaraja's Champu Rāmāyaṇa, we have very beautiful prose passages as well. In the Balakanda itself, when Chandra was tormented by Ravana, the poet writes a very beautiful passage. Esha mrugankopi gayaya saparishranti vishranti sasambhraman namajjana parivrute majjana grihābhimukhe dashamukhe tatratya vichitratara shata kumbhastambhak stambhagra pratyagra pratyukta sphatika shila salabhanjika punja karatala kalita nijopalamaya kalashamukhad achchachcham avichinna dharam ambudharam nijakarabhimarshad apadayam tatra prasada pishunanam shunasira chirakankshitanam vimshati vidhavikshananam ksanamatram patram bhavati. Now, as soon as hearing this prose passage, one is obviously led to the conclusion that there is something captivating in it. But there is not a regular pattern of laghus and gurus. There is not a regular pattern of short and long syllables. Whereas if you hear a meter such as Shardula Vikridita, Paravara Payo Vishoshana Kala, Parina Kala Nalajwala Jala Vihara Vishikha Vyāpara Ghora Kramaha from Vedanta Deshika's work, you will notice that there is a repeated pattern. There is a regularly discernible pattern of laghus and gurus. And he says, Aniyata gatihi gadyasya lakshanam, niyata gatihi padyasya lakshanam. If there is a repeated, if there is a definite pattern of laghus and gurus within the ambit of a poetic meter, then that is called as a padya. If there is not, it is called as a gadya. So the fascinating aspect of this work is, as soon as you hear an explanation for a concept, you will understand it and it will seem obvious. But it is not so obvious because the entire tradition had not explained these concepts so beautifully. And he goes on to explain words such as vritta and jati as well. Raghuvaṃśa Higbalulu mentioned this verse. Padyan chatushpadam jneyam vrittanja tiritidvidha ekadesha sthiraja tirvrittam guru laghu sthiram. This is an ancient verse. And this had a pathabheda or a textual recension, a difficulty in its understanding. But Seriapu says Sthira is the actual patha, and he goes on to say Padya is or a vritta is one in which there is a sarvadesha sthiratva. What does this mean? As all of us know, a typical Sanskrit meter has 4 feet to it, and each foot has various gurus and laghus. And if all the 4 feet have the same number of letters and a regular pattern of this short and long syllables, then it is it can be called as vritta. If not, it can be called as jati. And in order to explain jati as well, Seriapu employs so-called modern scientific concepts such as genus and species. He says these are fascinating concepts, and I don't think I have the time to go into them. But mind you, Seriapu was not educated in the modern system as we know it today, but his scientific mind innately or inadvertently came up with these concepts. So to put it very briefly, jati or a genus is something in which it is a group in which objects of similar characteristics are put together for ease of analysis. And within the jati, there are various species. So there are various vyaktis. And he goes on to say, so the examples are any in number, jati and vyakti. I will not go into it. But the fascinating aspect of it is even a popular meter such as Anushtup and Upajati can be classified under these jatis like Akshara Jati. Seriapu comes up with the same name because the definition of Anushtup, Panchamam Laghu Sarvatra, it is inadequate. It does not explain all the characteristic traits of the Anushtup completely. So he comes up with a new classification, Akshara Jati, for it. And he goes on to classify Gati because he has defined it as Akarshika Chandas Saranihi. He goes on to classify it as Druta, Vilambita and Madhyama. He does not do it for the first time. He has borrowed this concept from various predecessors. And he says Laghuvahala Gatihi Druta. If there is a string of only short syllables, then that particular gati is called as druta, in that it appears to be very swift. If there is a string of long syllables, then that is called as vilambita, because that appears to be long drawn out. If there is a mixture of it, if there is an admixture of long and short syllables, then that is called as madhyama gati. And using these concepts, he defines the term yati or sesura or poetic pause. Now, yati is a concept that is pivotal to Chandaḥ-śāstra, and all our Shastrakaras starting from Pingala had defined yati as a virama, as a pause within the ambit of a poetic or a metrical, within the ambit of a poetic meter. But why? Why do we stop? Viramaha, yatir viramaha, yatir vichhedaha. These are some of the definitions given out by Pingala and many other Shastrakaras like him. But why is there a need to stop within the ambit of a meter? Seriapu says, I will give you a very famous example. I will take just a single line of the poetic meter Manda Akranta. Shantakaram bhujaga shayanam padmanabham suresham. Shantakaram bhujaga shayanam padmanabham suresham. if you see the scansion of this particular line, scansion refers to the arrangement of laghus and gurus within the particular line. You can see that in the 4 letters at the beginning, Shantakaram, we have only long syllables. And in the following 6 letters, Bhujaga Shayanam, the 5 are laghus or short syllables followed by a guru. And in the third half, Padmanabham Suresham, we have an admixture of laghus and gurus with the predominance of guru syllables there as well. Na, 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 na. It is there. Now, keep this example in mind and see the explanation that Sediyapu comes up with. He comes up with 2 terms. One, he says it is called Chandaḥ Padagati and the other is called Bhāṣā Padagati. So any poetic meter, if not Mandakranta or any other poetic meter, has an innate or inherent rhythm to it, regardless of meaningful words being used within that poetic meter. It has a rhythm of its own that is called as Chandaḥ Padagati. So in the particular example, if you say instead of Shantakaram Bhujaga Shayanam, if you say the verse, if you refer to the verse Kaschit Kanta Viraha Guruna Swadhikarat Pramattaha or Hartum Kumbhe Vinihitakara Swadu Hayyanga Veenam or any such verse composed in the same meter, regardless of it, the structure of Mandakranta remains the same, which is na 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 na. It has 17 syllables within each foot of this meter. And if you go on repeating this pattern of laghus and gurus, and he says it is beneficial to employ a single syllable, a monosyllable such as na, in order to recite the meter aloud and discern the yati for yourself. Na 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 na. If you go on repeating this, and if your ears are attuned to the poetic rhythm, you will figure it out for yourself, even if nobody explains the concept to you, that after the 4 letters, there is a pause. Why? Because there is a change in the gati. In the 4 letters, like I said, there is a predominance of gurus. There are only guru aksharas. That is the vilambita gati. In the next part, there is the druta gati. Na 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 na. Laghu bahulya. That is, there is a predominance of the short syllables. So when different gatis meet, then there this yati, the concept of yati comes. Why is there a stop? Why is there a poetic pause? Because various gatis or various poetic rhythms meet in that particular point. This was the ingenious definition that Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta came up with. And this can be applied across all poetic meters. And yati is also applicable to matra jatis, not just vrittas. And in the case of Bhāṣā Padagati, it is important to pronounce the first letter of all the meaningful words in a much more accentuated manner, in a more pronounced manner. For instance, if you say Shantakaram is a single word, the first letter is Sha. So you will have to pronounce that letter Sha in a much more pronounced manner in contrast with all the letters. So Shantakaram, Bhujaga Shayanam, Padmanabham Suresham. There is Phutatarotchara, as Sediyapu calls it. So that is important. And when there is a Yati Bhanga, what does it mean? What does Yati Bhanga mean? Yati Bhanga is taken up as a blemish both in Chandaḥ-śāstra and in Alankara-śāstra. Aestheticians also count Yati Bhanga or Bhagna Yati as a poetic blemish or a kāvya dosha. Even in Chandaḥ-śāstra, it is counted as a blemish. Why is it so? What accounts for this poetic blemish? It is because there is the mixture of Chandaḥ Padagati and Bhāṣā Padagati is not harmonious. Because the meter has an inherent rhythm of its own, and because the poet, drawing from his poetic talent, goes on arranging one word after another within that poetic meter, the two have some dissonance. The two exhibit some dissonance. That is why there is a Chando Bhanga or Yati Bhanga. I will give you just one example. I will just recite one line. I won't go into the whole verse. Vidya Vastu Samruddhirit Yakhila Samagri Samete Sada. Or I will give you a better example from Bhartrhari's Niti Shataka. It is from the poetic meter Prithvi. It says, Labheta Sikatasu Tailamapi Yatnatah Piditum. Labheta Sikatasu Tai. Lamapi yatnatah piditum. There is a poetic stop there, pause there, but it has not been followed by that meter. The yati, the fixation or the conclusive pause within the Prithvi meter is a fascinating subject by and of itself. The Yati got fixed by the time of Sriladitya Harshavardhana. It was not fixed by the time of Bhartrihari, and that is why we observe this Yati Bhanga. And Sediyapu comes up with other fascinating concepts as well, such as Laya, Vritta, and Avartagatis, and so on. Like Raghavendra Hebbalalu mentioned in the ambit of his talk, why do we see a predominance of meters such as Anushtup or Vasanta Tilaka or Shardula Vikridita or some such meters? It is because they are attuned to the natural linguistic rhythm of Sanskrit. If you observe the Sanskrit language, for example, the natural linguistic rhythm of Sanskrit is the Madhyama Akshara Gati, Madhyama Akshara Gati. And the meters which provide room for this Madhyama Akshara Gati, they are best suited to express this language. And Sediyapu explains concepts such as Laya and Tala in a very fascinating manner, which is applicable both to Sangeeta-śāstra and Chandaḥ-śāstra. He goes on to the etymology of the word Laya. The Dhatu Mula, Ling Shleshane, it means dissolution. What accounts for the dissolution, Sediyapu explains in this verse. And I cannot conclude this talk without referring to Sediyapu's explanation of the Vaidika Chandas. So he says the Lakshana, the preeminent characteristic trait of Vedic Chandas, it was thought to be the Traisvarya or Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, the three accents in which the Veda is recited. Agnimi, Ile, Purohitam, Yajnasya Deva, Mritvijam, Hota, Aram, Ratna, Dhata, Mam. You can see the various accents in it. Scholars had come to the conclusion that this Traisvarya is a fundamental characteristic trait of Vaidika Chandas, whereas Sediyapu says it is not. It is the Madhyama Akshara Gati which is a characteristic feature. Why? It is because Vedas have portions of prose also in them, whereas verse is said to be Chandas. We only say verse as Chandas, although we gave the name Chandas to Veda also, but for Vyavartakatva, for Pradhanyena Vyapadesha Bhavanti iti hetoha, we restrict the meaning of the word Chandas to Padyas alone. So Sediyapu came up with this clinching evidence that since Veda contains prose elements, prose passages as well, it would be indecorous, or it would not be correct at any rate to say that Traisvarya, it is also there in prose passages, because even if you see in Rudradhyaya, there are prose passages, and those prose passages have to be recited with Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, those patterns as well. So it is not Traisvarya, but the Madhyama Akshara Gati, which is the characteristic trait of the Vedika Bhasha. And he has many other things to say about Tantri Laya, about Tanaswarupa, about a poetic meter called as Raghata, how it evolved from the Marathi language. And it would be very interesting for us to note that Sediyapu, when he set out to write this work, he only wanted to clarify the meaning between the distinction between Laya and rhythm. But when he put pen to paper and when his thoughts evolved, this book came out as a result. And the Trika Vyavastha, why has Pingala made his Gana Vyavastha, Yamata Rajabhana Salagam, like JSS Murthy ji explained? Why are there only three aksharas or ganas? In all those three ganas, we only see there are three elements to it. Why is it so? Why are there no more letters? Why are there no less letters? So we have many fascinating topics such as this. I hope I have given you a flavor of this work, and it is an invitation to read the work in the original. I once again extend my thanks to everyone at the Indica and all the listeners of this talk as well. Namaskar.
What a fascinating talk, Shashikaranji. It was mesmerizing, and at one level, I wish it didn't finish. And we hope to have you back to expound more on some of the aspects that you'd have liked to cover further. And also on dot again. That's wonderful. Who said Indians don't maintain time? We do, and we can do it really well. Yeah. Moving on to the next presenter.
Yes.
I'd like to invite Shankar Rajaramanji and Arvind. Go ahead.
We look forward now to hearing Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, who's an MBBS doctor and psychiatrist by training, Samskrita poet by passion, and researcher by profession. He is a recipient of the Badarayana Vyasa Samman from the President of India for his contribution to Sanskrit language and literature. His doctoral thesis was on an interdisciplinary topic that bridged the psychology of emotions and Samskrita aesthetics. He has a special interest in Chitra Kāvya, wonder poetry, having composed several original Sanskrit works such as the Devi Danaviyam and Chitra Naishadham in this genre. His personal expertise in composing Chitra Kāvya allows him to appreciate the nuances of Chandas and the extra constraints posed by it in the context of Chitra Kāvya. He is currently Associate Professor, Center for Ancient History and Culture at Jain University, Bangalore. He will be speaking today on the interface of Chitra Kāvya and Chandas. Over to you, Dr. Shankar.
Thank you, Arvindji. Jnanānandamayam devam nirmalasphatikārkritim ādhāram sarva vidyānām hayagrivamupaśmahe. At the beginning, I would like to thank Indica for organizing this seminar on Chandas and everyone involved with it, Meghji, Arvindji, Hariji, as well as Paturiji. Without much ado, let me come to the topic. My topic is titled Interface of Chitra Kāvya and Chandas. Hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the first slide. This is the flow of my presentation. I shall give a brief introduction, slightly longish introduction to Chitra Kāvya, followed by a very brief introduction to Chandas, and discuss 6 instances which illustrate the ways in which Chitra Kāvya and Chandas interact with one another. And finally, as requested by the organizers, a summary in an Indian language. In this case, I shall use Sanskrit to summarize my talk. Thank you. To come to an introduction to Chitra Kāvya. Chitra Kāvya is often translated in English as wonder poetry, constraint poetry, or sometimes as pattern poetry. The word Chitra here basically means, is used in a sense of wonder. And Chitra Kāvya is poetry that elicits wonder because of the constraints that are involved in composing the verse. And when I say constraints, these are constraints which are self-imposed by the poet. And these are over and above the constraints. These constraints may not be there generally in the poem, but these are imposed over and above already existing constraints such as meter. And meter is, anyhow, we know, is accepted by all classical poets who write in Sanskrit and related languages. The main crux of Chitra Kāvya is to communicate a clear idea as poetically as possible. Given there are several constraints, the verse might not be very poetic, but as poetically as possible, but a clear idea with an economy of letters. And when I say economy of letters, this is achieved by 3 different ways: by repetition of certain letters, by non-repetition of letters, and by restriction in the type of letters that are used. And there are several subtypes of Chitra Kāvya. For each of the 3 categories that I have mentioned earlier, I shall be giving examples. Meghji, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. The first is repetition of letters, which could be again with place constraint or without place constraint. For the first example, I have this verse from Subhāṣita-s. Tara tara tarai retai ruttarottarato rutai ratartha tittiri rauti tire tire tarau tarau, which is called a Vyakshari. There are just 2 consonants in the entire verse, ta and ra. And this is translation by me and Venetia. And in the English translation, we have tried to use 4 consonants, T, R, S, and N. A tittiri in Eros' snare tires not as it tunes its strain. On trees it rests, on straits nearest to raise its notes sans restraint. Here we can see that there is a repetition of the and ra, but there is no place constraint for the repetition. On the other hand, there could also be a place constraint. For example, this verse from my Chitra Naishadam, the first verse of Chitra Naishadam, Namo Neerajanabhaya Nityaya Karunabdhaye which can be taken as the first line. Tamo nirasanarkaya daityanika trinagnaye, which is the second line. And here you see that every alternate letter of the first line repeats in the second line. So every alternate letter of the first line becomes the alternate letter of the second line. Mo, namo, tamo, niraja, nirasa, the ra is repeated. In this way, throughout the whatever letters come alternatively in the first line, also come alternatively in the second line. So here there is a repetition, but with place constraint. Coming to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. Here there is an illustration of this Gomutrika pattern. As you see, there is a zigzag pattern that evolves because of this repetition, and that is why it is called Gomutrika. Gomutrika literally means the pattern that is created when a cow urinates on the road, a meandering cow, and it is said to be a zigzag pattern. The third example would be where there is repetition of letters with place constraint, but it generates a shape resembling a real world object. In Gomutrika, there is just a geometrical pattern that is created, but you could also, the repetition could also generate a shape that resembles a real world object. For example, the Krishna Sarpabandha or the coil serpent pattern. And this is a verse from my Devi Danaviyam. Dhanurankusha kambu sharambujabhrit sajata makuta kalasarasana dashadik kalita swajana swanita munibhusura bhuta ganadi nuda. And you see certain letters which are colored, and there are pairs of letters which are colored, and these are repeated letters that repeat. So coming to the next slide, and because of this repetition, a certain pattern emerges. The table that is given before the pattern shows where the letters repeat. For example, A is the second letter in the first line, but A is also the penultimate letter, that is the penultimate letter of the fourth line. So A comes both in the first line as well as in the fourth line. Similarly, B also repeats. B is the third letter in the first line, and it is also the third letter from the end in the second line. So in this way, there are pairs of repetitions, and this pairing of letters creates a certain pattern, which in this case is the coiled serpent pattern, which is called Krishna Sarpabandha, black serpent pattern. So coming to the next slide. But Chitrakavya, economy of letters could also be achieved by non-repetition of letters. For example, this is a new Chitrakavya pattern, which I have evolved in my stotra called as Chitra Chintamani Stava. This is called Pratipada Apunarukta Swara, where a swara doesn't appear for the second time in any line of the, in each line of the verse. So this verse is in Anushtup. There are 8 letters in each line, and no swara repeats in a line. So in a line, if I have used a once, I cannot use a again. So Kaivalyam Bodhi Purnendu. Here you have I, A, O, I, U, A, and U. And there's no repetition of the swaras. So this is also a type of Chitrakavya. And the third type would be restriction in the type of letters that are used. This is also another example of a new Chitrakavya called as Anantarakshari. Here, this is a verse in which each letter in line 2 is the one that alphabetically, that is according to the Varnamala, follows each letter in line 1. Going to the next slide. Nekji, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Thank you. So the verse is as follows: Daya bhara lasa bheda mani veena karapara dhara malavaha medha yatishita khalaphala. So you can see that every consonant in the first line is mirrored by the next consonant in the second line. So the follows the, ra follows ya. So the second line has every consonant in the second line follows the consonant in the first line, but the swara doesn't change. An English example would be If the line 1 has bear, bread, far, the line 2 would have case, sees, gas. So after B, you have C, but A being a vowel gets repeated. After R you have yes, but E being a vowel gets repeated. So this is one type of Chitra Kāvya. So coming to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Now coming to the basics of Sanskrit Chandas. This has been discussed by others too, but just a summary. All short vowels take 1 unit of time to pronounce and are given a score of 1 and usually represented by the symbol U. All consonants combined with short vowels. For example, K, Ki, Ku, Kr, Tr take 1 unit of time to pronounce and are given a score of 1 and are represented by U. All long vowels, A, E, U, etc. take 2 units of time to utter. They are given a score of 2 and are represented by a horizontal line. All consonants that are combined with long vowels also take 2 units of time to utter, and they are also given a score of 2 and are represented by a horizontal line. And letter that precedes a conjoined consonant, that is a Sayyukta-kshara, is always considered as long, even though by itself it is short. For example, the letter Sh in Shambhu, though by itself it is short, because it is followed by a conjoined consonant Samyukta-kshara Mbhu, the Sh is considered as long. Coming to the next slide. Yeah. There are 2 types of meters, Vritta and Matra. And Vritta is a type of meter which is regulated by number of letters in each line and their long syllable and short syllable distribution, the Laghu Guru Prastara. Example, you have this meter Totaka, which has 12 letters in each line. The commonest example which everybody can relate to would be the verse from the Suprabhatam, Venkatesha Suprabhatam, Kamala Kuchachu Chuka Kunkumato. The previous example, Dhanurankusha Kambu Sharambu Jabrit, which I had shared, is also in the Totaka meter. Here, in the syllable distribution is 2 Laghu followed by a Guru, 2 Laghu followed by a Guru, and so you have 4 pairs, 4 sets of 2 Laghus followed by a Guru. Na 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 na. So totally you have 12 letters. On the other hand, another group of Chandas is called as Matra Chandas, where what is regulated is the total count of syllabic instants in each line. For example, in the Arya meter, you have the total count of syllables is 12. Total count of syllabic instants is 12 in line 1, 18 in line 2, 12 in line 3, and 15 in line 4. The distribution of long and short syllables is flexible, but the total syllabic count must be is what is restricted. So only total count of syllabic instance is regulated. 12 can be, for example, written as 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, or you can have 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2. So coming to, and there are several other patterns that are possible. So just to represent this, the famous Shatpadi Stotra, Avinayam Apanaya Vishno Damaya Manash Samaya Vishayam Ragatrishnaam Bhutadayam Vistaraya Taraya Samsara Sagarata. So if we count the number of matras, syllabic instants in each of these 4 lines, Avinayam Apanaya Vishno is 1 line, Damaya Manash Samaya Vishayam Ragatrishnaam is 1, Bhutadayam Vistaraya is the 3rd line, and Taraya Samsara Sagarata is the 4th line. And if we count based on the rules that were discussed earlier, you have 12 syllabic instants in the first line, 18 in the second, 12 in the third, and 15 in the fourth. So, coming to the next slide. So now coming to the important point of discussion, interface of Chitra Kāvya and Chandas. I shall be discussing 6 instances. The first instance is an obvious way in which Chandas and Chitra Kāvya, interface of Chandas and Chitra Kāvya, how they interact with one another. So you have a particular type of Chitra Kāvya called as Varnachyuta or Garbha Kavitva, which is in fact based on Chandas itself. You could call it as embedded verse. The word Varnachyuta is given for such a verse by Hemachandra in his Kāvya Anushasana. But otherwise, commonly it is known as Garbha Kavitva. And what is Garbha Kavitva? Removing certain letters from the original verse leaves us with a new verse in a new Chandas. And the example given by Hemachandra in his Kāvya is very interesting. You have this particular verse in the meter called as Siddhi, which has 21 letters in each line. Siddhi is more commonly known as Champakamala. It is one of the 5 Khyata Karnata Vrittas, which is commonly employed in both Telugu as well as in Kannada poetry. And sometimes it is also called as Champakavali, which seems to be a misnomer. Seems like Champakavali is mispronounced as Panchakavali. But this is the verse which is provided by Hemachandra. Sitandra Shirasrajara Chitamauli Shiromani Mauktikaistatha na 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 na. That is the pattern. The second, third, and fourth lines are as follows: Shikiru Chiror Gadrik Prutulalata Tateti Lakakriya Chasa Sputavi Katattaha Lalitam Vadanam Smitapeshalam Chatat Abhinavamishwaro Vahati Vesha Mahotu Hinadrijardhayuk. Pratinavam would have been better, but the verse that is quoted by Hemachandra has Abhinavam. So coming to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. In this particular verse, if you remove the first 2 letters and the last 7, you have a Chandas called as Pramitakshara Propinga. In the same way, if you remove the first 7 and the last 2, then you have another Chandas called as Dhruta Vilambita Propinga. The verse itself is a verse that describes Shiva and Parvati. But if you remove the first 2 letters and the last 7 letters, you get a new verse in Pramitakshara, which is a description of Shiva alone. In the same way, if you remove the first 7 letters and the last 2 letters, another new verse props up, which is in a different Chandas called as Dhruta Vilambita. And in this case, the verse is not on Shiva, but on Parvati. Combined together, the verse is on Shiva and Parvati. So just to read out one of those. So the Pramitakshara would be na 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 na. So Nrishirasrajara Chitamauli Shiro Ruchiro Dvadrikprutula Lata Vikatattaha Lalitam Vadanam Navamishwaro Vahati Veshamaho. This is Shiva's verse. And Parvati's verses Rachitamauli Shiromani Mauktikai Prutulalata Tate Tilaka Kriya Salalitam Vadanam Smitapeshalam Vahati Veshamaho Tuhinadrija. And by chance, I saw certain texts called as Kavi-Śikṣā texts in relation to this, and found that several Kavi-Śikṣā texts, especially Amarachandra Yati's Kāvya Kalpa Lata Vritti, provides a long list of such embedded Chandas, which it is used as a teaching tool for practicing Chandas. So coming to the next slide. Yeah, this is an excerpt from that work, Kāvya Kalpa Lata Vritti. So here, in fact, this is a very big list. I have just highlighted a small portion of that list. And here he discusses about how several other several Chandases are embedded in other Chandas. For example, Badrikayam Ante Lagabhyam Rathodata. So to the Chandas called as Badrika, if you add Lagu and Guru in the end, you end up with Rathodata. In a similar way, he lists several other Chandas and the embedded other Chandases in those original Chandas. So coming to the next slide. One example of instance 1 is where there is specificity in the letters removed. In the previous instance, I spoke about how if you remove 2 letters in the beginning and 7 letters in the end, you get a new verse. But here, there could also be non-specificity in the letters removed. The letters that are removed could be random. This is an example from Ratnakara's Haravijaya. You have 2 verses in Shardula Vikridita meter with 19 letters in each line. Sashrimana Mrudur Nisargagahane Darpan Nikriptadvisho, etc. In this, if you remove certain random letters, or if you isolate certain random letters, in fact, rather than saying remove certain letters, I should say isolate certain letters, you get a new verse which is in Arya. This is such a Arya verse which is got from the Shardula Vikridita is called as the Uttha Arya. The Arya that emerges. Arya verse which is got from the Shardula Vikridita is called Arya. the arya that emerges, which is called. Yeah. So the arya verse that emerges is as follows: Shri Durga Datta Vamsha Sahridaya Goshti Rasena Lalitankam Idamamrita Bhanusunur Vyadatta Ratnakara Kāvyam. So coming to instance 2, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So what do we do when rules of Chitrakāvya and Chandas clash with one another? So you know that these are two formal aspects of poetry, but sometimes the rules of Chitrakāvya can clash with rules of Chandas. And how does one reconcile and manage both? So to give out the secret, it is manageable by use of Sanyuktaksharas. Sanyuktaksharas come to the rescue. For example, this is a verse from my Devi Danaviyam, which I had discussed earlier too. Dhanurankushakam Busharambuja etc. Coming to the next slide. Yeah, next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? The next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So first, let us write down the Chitrakāvya rules for this pattern, then Chandas rules for this pattern, and how the two clash, and how when the two clash, you can manage by the use of Sanyuktaksharas. So Chitrakāvya rules have been discussed earlier too with respect to this verse. For example, you have A repeating somewhere else. A is the second letter of the first line, but A is also the penultimate letter of the last line. B is the third letter of the first line, but B is also the third letter from backwards in the second line. So that is what I have listed in the first table. In the second table, let us look at the Chandas rules for this pattern. And only rules that are relevant for this discussion are shown here. You see that with respect to those letters which repeat, in some cases, A, for example, let us take, A is Laghu, because it is the second letter of the first line. But A is also the penultimate letter of the fourth line. But even there, according to Chandas rules, it is Laghu. But this is not so simple in all other cases. Let us see with respect to the letter B. B is the third letter from the first line, and B is also the third letter backwards from the second line. But you see that in one case it is Guru, but in another case it has to be Laghu. So how do you manage? You have the same letter, but in one case it should be Guru, and in another case it should be Laghu. We manage by inserting Sanyuktaksharas next to these letters, because a Sanyuktakshara that comes after a Laghu makes that Laghu Guru. So at the same time, it remains Laghu, as well as because of the Sanyuktakshara that comes later, it comes next, it also becomes Guru. So if you go to the previous slide, Megji, can you go to the previous slide, please? Megji, can you go to the previous slide? Previous slide, sorry, not the next slide, previous slide. Yeah, previous to this. Previous to this slide, Megji. Yeah, thank you. So you find that the verse has some Sanyuktaksharas here and there. Dhanuranku, Kambu, Tasva, etc. And in these places, the Sanyuktaksharas have, thank you, the Sanyuktaksharas have not come randomly, but the Sanyuktaksharas serve a particular purpose. They make the previous letter Guru in spite of it being Laghu. So thank you, Megji. You can go to the slide number 18, please. Slide number 18. slide number 18, please. Can you go to the next slide? No, not this. Next. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Next. Can you please go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. Instance 3. So let us discuss instance 3. How do you adapt a Chitra Kāvya pattern that has traditionally been attempted in a Vritta Chandas for a Matra Chandas? So some patterns are possible only in certain meters. For example, the Mala Bandha, which is a garland pattern, can be attempted only in a meter whose total number of letters is a multiple of 7. The repeating unit here is shown diagrammatically here, and you have in each this is the repeating pattern of the Mala Bandha, these flower with 4 petals, and to create such a flower with 4 petals you require 7 letters, and therefore you can use only a Vritta where the total number of syllables is a multiple of 7 for constructing this Mala Bandha. But suppose I need to construct this Mala Bandha in the Matra Chandas. How do I modify a Matra Chandas for the purpose of creating a Mala Bandha? So can we go to the next slide? Can we go to the next slide, please? Slide number 19, please.
Dr. Shankar, sorry for the interruption. Meghji has a sound card issue as present, so I'll be taking over.
Yeah,
so please give me.
Slide number 19, please.
Yes, let me. Are you able to see, Dr. Shankar?
I am not able to see.
Oh, just let me share. We on slide 19.
Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So this is an example of a Mala Bandha verse in a Vritta with 14 letters in each line. The Vritta is called Praharana Kalika. And usually Mala Bandha is constructed in a Vritta. And so this is as it is usually practiced. But suppose if I have to construct the same Mala Bandha in a Matra Chandas. So you see in this example, in this Vritta example, Navaravati Vashe, you have the letter Va alternating in the first group of 7. Then again you have the letter Nu alternating in the second group of 7. Navaravati Vashe, you have Va coming alternatively. In Danu Tanu Janishi, you have Nu coming alternatively. Again, Tvamayi Mayi Manak, you have Ma coming alternatively. So you have these sets of 7 letters where each alternate letter is the same. And that set of 7 letters is one of the flowers in that garland. So coming to the next slide, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, this is a figurative representation of the Mala Bandha. So you start with Na, the downward arrow towards Va, then the right-sided arrow towards Ra, then again the left-sided arrow towards Va, again from Va towards Ti, from Ti towards Va, and from Va towards Vashe Sha. So in this way, the entire verse is composed. Can we go to the next slide? But if I need to compose a verse in this pattern using a matra meter such as Giti, the total matras in a Giti is 60. So 12, 18, 12, 18. So the number of syllabic instants, the time distribution is 60 syllabic instants. But if I have to distribute this 60 units of time among short and long syllables in such a way that the total syllabic count is a multiple of 7. Why 7? Because I can create a Mala Bandha only in a meter, which is a multiple of 7. So I have to distribute these 60 units of times in such a way that the total syllabic count is a multiple of 7. So one solution is a verse from my Mala Madhavam. Dhara dhara birame yavvanavati vatsapala kulatilake chaladala kalatastome rametame chittamastamalamakre. Can we go to the next slide? Here, if we count the number of syllables, not the syllabic instance, but the number of syllables, you see that there are 7 syllables in the first line, 21, totally you see that there are 42 syllables, and 42 is a multiple of 7. At the same time, it is also following the rules of Matra Chandas. So you have 12 syllabic instance in the first line, 18 in the second, 12 in the third, and 18 in the fourth. And thirdly, it also has an embedded Chitrakavya Mala Bandha. So for example, the first line, Dhara, Dhara, Bhirame, you see that Ra is alternating. So Dhara, Dhara, Bhira. Similarly, the next group of 7 has Yavvanavati, Vatsa. So Va is repeating. Pala, Kula, Tilake, you have La repeating alternatively. So this is following all the 3 rules. The rules of Chitrakavya, the rules of so many syllabic instants necessary for Matra Chandas like Giti, and the rule of the total number of syllables being a multiple of 7. All the 3 rules have been followed here. So coming to the next slide. This is another solution. And this another solution has been put basically to show that there is not just one way of solving this puzzle. You can have multiple ways of solving the puzzle of where you need to match the number of syllabic instants and also the number of syllables and also incorporate a Chitrakavya. So in the second example, if you compare verse 1 with verse 2, you see that verse 1, line 1 has 12 syllabic instants as it has to be for the Giti, but that those 12 syllabic instants have been achieved by using 7 syllables. In the same way, for verse 2, line 1, the same 12 syllabic instants have been achieved, not with 7 syllables, but with 8 syllables. So this is how there are multiple solutions possible. Coming to instance 4, some Chitrakavya types can be attempted only in certain specific meters, while others can be attempted in a wide variety of meters. For example, Sarvato Bhadra, Muraja Bandha, etc. can be attempted in a Chandas with 8 letters in each line. Mala Bandha can be attempted only in a Chandas where the total number of letters is a multiple of 7. Gomutrika, on the other hand, can be attempted in any Chandas, and that is why I have used it in my Chitra Naishadam. And without discussing too much, but I'll just give a gist of the reason why some Chitrakavya types can be attempted only in a Chandas such as Anushtup with 8 letters in each line. This is related to the following fact: though there is no restriction in the number of letters in each line of a Sanskrit verse, the number of lines themselves are always restricted to 4. So this is the crux of the reason why certain Chitrakavyas can be attempted only in certain meters like Anushtup. So going to the next slide. Just 3 more slides to go. This is the Sarvatobhadra all-round palindrome, which can be attempted only in a Chandas which has 8 letters in each line. Coming to the next slide. If Gomutrika is what I discussed earlier too, the zigzag pattern. If Gomutrika is composed in a Chandas with even number of letters in each line, then every even letter of first and second lines will be identical to every even letter of the third and fourth line. On the other hand, if Gomutrika is composed in a Chandas with odd number of letters in each line, then every even letter of the first line will be identical to every even letter of the third line. And every odd letter, not even letter, but every odd letter of the second line will be identical to every odd letter of the fourth line. This is represented in tables below. The first example is where you have even number of letters in each line, 8. The second example is where you have odd number of letters in each line, that is 11. So as you can see, in the first, A is the second letter in the first line. A is also the second letter in the third line. On the other hand, when there are odd number of letters, A is the second letter in the first line, and A is the second letter in the third line, but F is the first letter in the second line, and F is the first letter in the fourth line. So the matching should be different. The first and the third line, the matching should be between the even letters, and the second and the fourth line, the matching should be between the odd letters. Coming to the next slide. Instances 5 and 6, I'll not go into details. One way of bringing novelty in Chitra Kavya is by attempting to compose a pattern in a Chandas that has not been traditionally employed for it. For example, Mala Bandha, which I talked about a few slides earlier, has traditionally been composed in Vasanta Tilaka, which has 14 letters, or Sraktara, 21 letters in each line, or Champakamala, 21 letters. It can be composed only in a Chandas where the total number of letters is a multiple of 7. But I have composed one in Praharana Kalika, which has 14 letters in each line. Similarly, Chakrabandha is generally composed in Shardula Vikridita, which has 19 letters. For a Chakrabandha, you require an odd number of letters in each line. So it is traditionally composed in Shardula Vikridita, but I have a verse in the Mattamayuri, which has 13 letters. When one evolves a novel Chitra Kavya pattern, one must also figure out the Chandas in which it can be attempted. When I evolved the novel pattern Ardhonmilita Padmabandha in my Devi Danaviyam, I also had to figure out that it can be attempted in the Ruchira meter, which has 13 letters in each line. Because the pattern in each line is A, B, C, B, A. Then you have D, E, D, and then F, G, H, G, F. So there are palindromes, 3 palindromes here. And those 3 palindromes, if they have to fit together in a line, then that line must have 13 letters totally. So I have used the Ruchira meter, which I found was suitable for that new type of Chitra Kavya, which I evolved, called as Ardhonmilita Padmabandha. So coming to the last slide, I'm sorry for the technical glitches that were caused in between. I will summarize in Sanskrit.
Apology is due from me. There was actually a sound card crash at my end, as a result of which I think we lost some time on the slides. Please go ahead with your last slide, Dr.
Sure. Pratipaditस्य विषयस्य संस्कृतभाषया सारं प्रथमतो मया चित्रकाव्यस्य छन्दसश्च स्थूलः परिचयः प्रदत्तः तदनु तयोर्मितः सम्बन्धे ये विशेषाः ते षोडा विभज्य सोदाहरणं निरूपिताः ते विशेषाः इमे प्रथमतः एकस्मिन् छन्दसि छन्दोन्तरस्य अन्तर्भावो यस्य वर्णच्युतमिति गर्भकवित्वमिति वा नाम द्वितीयं तु यथास्थानं संयुक्ताक्षराणां निवेशनेन परस्परबाधकयोरपि छन्दश्चित्रकाव्यनियमयोः सामरस्योपपादनम् तृतीयं तु मात्राछन्दसि मालाबन्धादीनां निबन्धने उपायः चतुर्थं तावत् चित्रकाव्यविशेषाणां छन्दोविशेषापेक्षित्वं तत् अनपेक्षित्वं वा पंचमं चित्रकाव्यनिर्माणे नूतनछन्दसाम् उपादेयता षष्ठं पुनः नूतनचित्रकाव्यप्रकाराणां निर्मितौ अनुगुणानां छन्दसां च ग्रहणम् इति भद्रं नमस्काराः.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajaraman. That was a wonderful talk, and actually I lost out on listening to some parts of it because of the sound card crash, but I'm seeing the responses from the other panelists, and it's fabulous. I apologize again for some of the slides related issues. You had to mention it a couple of times, but I couldn't hear it. But thank you very much. Thank you for that for that talk. Arvind, I request you to invite Dr. Krishnamurthy.
Our final talk for today's symposium is from Dr. Srikanth Krishnamurthy, who is a psychiatrist from Bengaluru, India, living in England. A trained vocalist and composer in Karnataka Sangeeta, he also writes in several languages: Sanketi, Kannada, Tamil, English, Sanskrit, to name some. He's the first Vyākaraṇa to create musical compositions in the Sanketi language. He also writes verses in English set to classic Indian meters, Chandas. His haiku, tanka, haibun, and haiga have been published in reputed international journals and anthologies and won prizes. He has translated many works between languages. Notable are the translations of the magnum opus Mankutimana Kagga into Sanketi in the same meter, Sumati Shataka from Telugu to Kannada, the renowned Kannada novel Vāmsha to Sanketi, and classical Tamil poetry to other languages. He'll be speaking today on verslation, meters, and music. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Arvind, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's been lovely to listen to some of the talks. Unfortunately, due to the time difference, I missed the first few. Okay, without much further ado, let me get into what I would like to talk about. So yeah, today I would like to talk about verslation, as Arvind has kindly introduced. So what is verslation? Now, verslation is basically a portmanteau term from verse translation. This is a term I coined about 4 years ago. I think in 2 weeks, it'll be exactly 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. So, so it's basically a padyanuvada. So where you translate the verse in the original language to a recipient language, preferably in the same meter, but not necessarily so. Here, I think one has to remember that there will be several challenges. So although this is meant to be a lecture, mine will be a more a demonstration than a lecture. So let me start with a verslation, one verse, and I'll talk about it in a bit. So it's in English. Vāṇī plays melodies about Pashupati's valor upon Kachapi. Soon as you, Lalita, utter an accolade, nodding the head in assent, she lays it to the side beneath a covering. There goes quietly the lute. What string can deliver ever the melody, sweet as your voice, mother? So you might have noticed that this is actually in the Shardula Vikridita meter, but set to the English language. I'll just read it for the Chandas to actually come out better. Vāṇī plays melodies about Pashupati's valor upon Kachapi. Soon as you, Lalita, utter an accolade, nodding the head in assent, she lays it to the side. Beneath the covering, there goes quietly the lute. What string can deliver ever the melody, sweet as your voice, mother? As I think a few of you would have definitely understood, this is a verslation of a lovely verse from the Saundarya Lahari. Vipanchya gayanti vividhamapadanam pashupate tvayarabdhe vaktum chalita shirasa sadhu vachane tadiyair madhuryair apalapita tantri kalaravam nijam veenam vani nichulayati cholena nibhritam. So this is actually in a different meter from the original. But I will also quote another verslation of mine from the same Saundarya Lahari, which I have done in 2 meters in English. One is in the original, which is Shikharini. The other one is in the Shardula Vikridita. So I'll tell the Shikharini verse first. A half-bloomed blue lotus, very benevolent, is the very eye. Shive, sprinkle me too. A revivifying look, liberally. To you it's no loss, but to the pitiable, me propitious. The moonbeams fall equal to the megacity and to a desert. The one Shardula Vikridita goes this way. May thine eye, brilliant, akin to the pretty, half-blossoming blue lily, fall on me very far away, pitiable, for 1 second too many. This will prove very sure to me propitious, and cost to you not at all. Does moon discriminate between a residence or chaparral, O Shive? And I'm sure you know the original verses. Drishadraghi yasya daradalita nilot palarucha daviyamsam dinam snapaya kripaya mamapi Shive anenayam dhanyo bhavati nachate haniriyata vaneva harmyeva samakara nipato himakaraha. So I would now like to actually share with you a verse from the Mankutimana Kagga, which I have actually verslated into several languages, just to show how it can sound. So yeah, the original is Ilayinda molake ogevandu tamategalilla, phalamaguvandu tutturidaniyilla, ಬೆಳಕೀವ ಸೂರ್ಯ ಚಂದ್ರರದೊಂದು ಸದ್ದಿಲ್ಲ, ಹೊಲಿ ನಿನ್ನ ತುಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮ. So first I will say in Sanketi, ಇಳೆಯಣ್ಣು ಮೊಳಕ ಓಂದಿರ ತಮಟೆಗಳು ಇಲ್ಲ, ಪಳುಮಾಗರಂಡೆ ಕೊಂಬೆಯು ಊದಿತಿಲ್ಲ, ಒಳಿಕುಡರ ರವಿಶಶಿಹ ಪಣ್ಣಿನಾರ್ ಭಟಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ದಳ ತುಟಿಗಳುಂದೇತ ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮ. Next I would like to say it in Tamil. தளிரெழும் பொழுதிலோர் தம்பட்ட ஒலி இல்லை, அழிபழுத்திட நமரி அரவித்துமில்லை, ஒளிருமதி சூரியரின் ஓசை கேட்டாரில்லை, தலைவுன் இதழ்களை தடிராயனே. Next in Telugu. పుట్టినప్పుడు చిగురు బొబ్బరించుట లేదు, చెట్టు పండిన వేళ షెహనాయి బట్టు పొగడుట వెలయు, భానుశశులకు లేదు, కుట్టుని పెదవులను గోలగురుడ. And so these are all in the original Panchamatra Chaupadi meter. But here what we have to remember is that when verslating, yes, it's preferable to use the meter in the original, but sometimes you will have to change it to suit the language, the recipient language. And this is why in Hindi I have used the doha meter for the same verse. Pallav dharti se uga parna baje dhol, phalpa ke parna suni shahnai ki bol, bhaaye suraj chand bhi kuch na kiye dhamal, seekh tanik apne hont seene ko mandalal. So again, this is in a different verse. And just to show that, you know, the Panchamatra Chaupadi can be used in Sanskrita as well. Another Mankutima Kagga verse. Janakajaya Darushanadin Aitu Ravana Chapala, Kanakamruga Darushanade, Janakiya Chapala, Janavavana Nindipudu, Kanikaripuda Akeyali, Manada Bage Ariyadadu, Mankutima. This in Sanskrita I have done it this way. Janakaja Darshanat Chapala Saravanaha, Kanakamruga Darshanat Janaki Chapala, Tam Janam Nindatitu, Tam Dayam Dharayati, Namano Gatim Veti Balamitra. So here, next what I would like to demonstrate is actually, I think this is a verse from Vijika. Let me read the original. So I've got it here. So yeah, the original verse is actually, Vilasa Masrunol Lasan, Musala Lola Do, Kandali, Paraspara, Pariskhalad Valaya, Niswanod Bandhura, Lasanti Kalahunkriti, Prasabha Kampitora Stala, Trutad Gamaka Sankula, Kalama Kandani Gitayaha. So this one I have verslated in this manner. Let me get this. Okay, this is in Sanketiya. So Chalak Chulakanella Nallonaka Chachirot Chullira. I'm just trying to read this correctly. Yeah. Chalak Chulakanella Nallonaka Chachirot Chullira, Palak Jalakalandulinjavala Kailalahaira, Dulak Bolakanadara, Mulahadul, Tadanjondira, Kuluk Kuluki Su Wusu, Nusuli, Kotapatakara. So this is how it is. So I think one thing we have to remember again, when we are translating between languages, we have to understand the nuances of both the languages, understand the nuance of the original poem, and also respect the beauty and the rules and regulations of each language. I think what we call as Bhasha Maryada, which covers a lot. So it is very important to try and actually keep a finger on the pulse. Again, as a doctor, I have to talk about pulses. Sorry about that. So you keep a finger on the pulse of both the languages and try and ensure that you do not actually restrict either of them in either flow or in terms of quality. So it has to be essentially lossless, both in quality and quantity. So neither damage nor loss has to occur in so much as is possible. I think it's subject to the restrictions of oneself mostly rather than the language. So for example, in Kannada, we have a rule that the lagam, so a lagu followed by a guru should not occur at the beginning of any gana or at the beginning of any verse unless it's actually dictated by the chandas itself. So, but if you look at this, the lagam rule is not necessarily applicable to another language. For example, in Tamil, there is no such restriction. And likewise, when I translated into Sanketi, I have not found the need to restrict the lagam simply because the lagam usage in words is quite common. There's a lot of words in Sanketi which will start with the lagam itself. So here is one verse to demonstrate, again from the Mankutimana Kagga. So the original is Naran Ondu Vyavahara Yaradaya Vayalakha Horagananu Bhoga Kondu Volaniti Gondu Varamana Deha Kadode Manasakadenu Parikisa Lekkavanu Mankutima Ore Karyattayu Veyu Lekku Rende Iparatte Bhukti Te Dulniti Tede Narandadayu Maikache Manasikode Parikshipi Lekhatta Mankutima. So let me read it again just to give the idea of the chandas. Ore Karyattaya Veyu Lekku Rende Iparatte Bhukti Te Dulniti Tede Narandadayu Maikache Manasikode Parikshipi Lekhatta Mankutima. So this is how it runs in the verslation. So, and again, another thing we have to remember when I was talking about remembering the rules and regulations is it's important to keep the rules. For example, in Telugu and Tamil, we have what is called as Vadi or Mone. So that means it's a Keshara as well. But in the Keshara, you also have what is called as the Akshara Maitri. So it has to come there. So it's important to do that. So when you're translating, in as much as possible, try and keep the rules. Sometimes you may add rules. It's better not to subtract what is expected in a particular language, because if it doesn't follow the basic rules that's actually used, then it'll quite fall flat. So that's really important. So here, I have done the reverse. For example, from Telugu, this is from Sumati Shataka. No, actually, this is from Vemana. So in Vemana's Padyas, you don't have the prasa, but you only have the yati pattern. And I have kept that in Kannada as well. So instead of having Adi prasa or Dvitiya Akshara prasa, I have used the Vadi here. So the original goes like Kanaga Sommu Lenno Kanakamba Dokkati Pasula Vanne. I'm just trying to read from Telugu, that's why I'm a bit slow. Pasula Vanne Lenno Palokatiye Pushpa Jatu Lenno Puja Yokkate Sumi Vishwadabhirama Minura Vema. So in Kannada, I have made this as Karna Lodave Yesto Kanaka Vembudu Vande Hasuva Banna Halavu Halondene Pushpa Jati Yesto Pujeya Dondene Kshitijat Madbhirama Kela Vema. There is a nuance here which I would like to point out. Here, although the Gana pattern is exactly the same in Kannada and Telugu, the way the Ganas are actually reckoned are slightly different, slightly but significantly, because there are certain restrictions in how the Ganas have to be reckoned in Telugu, or how they have to be actually written out. But in Kannada, we do not have that restriction, and therefore, again, I have retained the way it is in Kannada, because that is how it is. So again, I've tried to keep the best of both the donor and the recipient language here. So yeah, that's one. So the next one is, it's a doha in Kannada. So yeah, let me read the Kabir doha first. Kabir te nar andh hai, guru ko kehte aur, hari roothe guru thor hai, guru roothe nahi thor. So here in the verslation in Kannada, let me read it first. ಗುರುವನು ತೆಗಳುವವನು ಕುರುಡ, ಕೊಳ್ಳು ಕಬೀರನ ಸೊಲ್ಲ, ಗುರುವೆ ಶರಣು ಹರಿ ಮುನಿದಾಗ, ಗುರು ಮುನಿದರೆ ಶರಣಿಲ್ಲ. So here, of course, I have kept the doha meter, but I have additionally added the dvitiyakshara prasa and also the vadi or the mohni. Yeah. So that is because, Kannada being a Dravida language, it's very important to, again, have what is important in Kannada, but also not lose the antya prasa and the general pattern of the doha meter. So I have tried to retain both. So another Kabir doha, I'll just mention it. There's nothing to explain here. ಮಾತಲಿ ಬೈಗಳು ಬಳಸುತ್ತಿರೆ ಬನ್ನ ಜಗಳ ಬರಿಹಾಳು, ಸೋತು ತೆರಳಿದವನೇ ಸಾಧು, ತೊಡಗಿ ಬೆಳೆಸಿದವ ಕೀಳು. So the original is गारी ही सो उपजय, कलह कष्ट और मीचे, हारी चले सो संत है, लागी मरे सो नीच. So the next verse, it's a very famed verse from Gaha Satasai. So I'm sure a lot of you will recognize that. The original, this is about the hunter and the huntress. Yeah, the one who is pining away. Ajjakai movi viyaho vahavahu ruva jovanumatta sohaggam dhanu rumpach chalena rachanka vikkirai. So this is the original. In fact, I'll tell a little bit about the verse in a bit. So the verslation into Sanketi here is Vedati sobagattattina kudito dinanityu kanna kukkane vedanu attatinaye hoodaravilla herayane onane. So it's about how the hunter is pining away, but it's actually expressed without saying that he's pining away, saying that he actually keeps on shaving away the bow, which in effect is to say that he could no longer wield the bow as it was because of his weakening. This is where I would call it as a haiku movement. So in haiku, you don't say, you just show. So this is a very beautiful verse, which no doubt you will all already know about. But the fact that the pining away is shown without ever saying the man is pining away for the woman is the beauty of it. And that's exactly what we see in haiku. And this is the cross-cultural parallels we see, which may be coincidental, but evidently very beautiful when you actually chance upon it. Right. I'll give an example of a verslation from Sangam poetry. This is from Aindine Ezhubadu. So I will talk a little bit more about about what I have tried to do here. So let me read the verslation first. Mala tolacha baga vanamangu ghamugutta talamalipiyanaliha tanga jhumugutta palayavottadenna palandi mutta kaluvane nashruvul kai. So you can see Mala tolacha baga vanamangu ghamugutta. So it's kind of Panchamatra Chopadi, but with a truncated end on each line. The last line is obviously much shorter. So I'll read the original now. Kar podai pandil kamala puravellam ar podidavande imirndada neer tindri onradalaikum sirumale marulandu nindraga nindrathu neer. Right. So here the original actually is in the Venva meter. So what I have done here is that the verslation, the verse in Sanketi actually respects both the Panchamatra pattern as also the Venba pattern. So you can actually scan it in two different ways. Therefore, it's kind of respecting, it's a nod to the original, not just in terms of meaning, but also in the meter. But it certainly also takes into account the way the Sanketi language flows and actually puts it into the Panchamatra pattern. And so you also try to retain Shabdalankaras. For example, Antadi. There are, the Tiruvandadi, the Arvas Tiruvandadi is a very beautiful set of 100 verses where the last word repeats itself as the first word of the next verse. I will just give two verses. This is a verslation into Kannada. So here I'll read the verslation and then the original. Tanu bhuvi bettavale taadisuva kadalelaru banu nungidudu nija vatavembaru ಮಾನವಿಲ್ಲದ ಗುಣದ ಮಾಗಡಲೆ ಅಂದಿಳೆಯ ಮಾನದಷ್ಟಿದ್ದಿತೋ ನಿನ್ನ ಬಾಯಿ. Okay. ತಾನು ಭುವಿ ಬೆಟ್ಟವಲೇ ತಾಡಿಸುವ ಕಡಲೆಲರು ಬಾನು ನುಂಗಿದುದು ನಿಜವಾತೆಂಬರು. ಮಾನವಿಲ್ಲದ ಗುಣದ ಮಾಗಡಲೆ ಅಂದಿಳೆಯೇ ಮಾನವು ಇಲ್ಲದ ಗುಣದ ಮಾಗಡಲೆ ಅಂದು ಇಳೆಯ ಮಾನದಷ್ಟು ಇದ್ದಿತೋ ನಿನ್ನ ಬಾಯಿ. The original is மண்ணும் மலையும் மறிகடலும் மாருதமும் விண்ணும் விழுங்கியது மெய்யன்பர் எண்ணில் அலகளவு கண்ட சீராழியாய்க்கு அன்று உலகளவும் உண்டோ உன் வாய். Is your mouth as big enough to fit all the whole world is the gist of it. The next verse, so the original finished with vai in Tamil, and in Kannada I finished with bai. So the next verse starts with bai itself. ಯವನಲ್ಲದೆ ಯವನಲ್ಲದೆ ಪರಸದೈ ಕೈಳೆಯ. Sorry, my throat isn't actually cooperating, so let me just recite it. ಬಾಯವನನಲ್ಲದೆ ಪರಸದೈ ಕೈ ಇಳೆಯ ತಾಯವನನಲ್ಲದೆ ತಾವು ಮುಗಿಯವೈ ಸಾಯಸುರಿ ಮೊಲೆ ನಂಜ ಸವಿದವನ ಮೈ ಹೆಸರನೇ ಅಲ್ಲದೆ ಕಂಡು ಕೇಳದು ಕಣ್ಗಿವಿ. வாய் அவனை அல்லது வாழ்த்தாது கையுலகம் தாயவனை அல்லது தாம் தொழா பேய்முலை நஞ்சு ஊனாக உண்டான் உருவொடு பேரல்லால் காணாக்கண் கேளா செவி. So my eyes and ears do not see or hear anything other than the mother of the whole world, that is Vasudeva Krishna is the gist of it. And there is some description of what he does here. So yeah, I have retained the Antadi pattern. And also, similarly, this is a verse from Tirupavai, which again is in Kannada. The meter is different, but I have retained some Shabdalankaras where there is a pun in the original, and I have actually sort of brought it into the verslation as well. So this is actually a conversation between Andal and her friends. They are calling her saying, "You're being very lazy. Why are you still lying down when the whole world has woken up?" So you will all know the original. At least some of you will definitely be aware of it. Yelle ilangiliye innam urungudiyo sillen ralayen min nangai meer podargindren வல்லையுன் கட்டுரைகள் பண்டே உன் வாயறிதும் வல்லீர்கள் நீங்களே நானேதான் ஆயிடுக ஒல்லை நீ போதா உனக்கென்ன வேறுடையை எல்லாரும் போந்தார் போந்தெண்ணிக்கொள் வல்லானை கொன்றானை மாற்றாரை மாற்றழிக்க வல்லானை மாயனை பாடலோர் எம்பாவாய். So வல்லானை, that's the pun here. So that's the Yamaka and Shlesha as well here. So in the verslation in Kannada, it is this way. Yelle elagiliye innu malagi heyo yelle elagiliye innu malagi heyo gullu madadirigo baruve balle ninna husi baya baraba ಬಲ್ಲವರು ನೀವು ಬಕನಾನೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಏನೆಸಕ ಬೇಗ ಬಾ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಏನೆಸಕ ಬೇಗ ಬಾ ಎಲ್ಲೇ ಬಂದಾಯ್ತೆ ಎಣಿಸಿಕೊಬ್ಬ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಂದಾಯ್ತೆ ಎಣಿಸಿಕೊಬ್ಬ ಬಲ್ಲವನ ಕರಿಯ ಬಡಿದುರಿ ಪೂವು ಕೊಲಬಲ್ಲವನ ಬಗೆದು ಪಾಡಿಲಿಲೆ. So here, Ballavana Kariya. So he is a strong elephant. He is somebody who can kill the strong elephant, which is Kolayapida here. Ballavana Kariya Badidu Ripuva Kola Ballavana Bagedu. He who is capable of destroying all of the enemies. So the Ballavana is split differently, and thereby I have retained the pun here. And just another thing I would like to point out here, when I sang it, I used actually two allied ragas, Darbaru and Nayaki. So where the friends are taking quite a strident tone, saying, "How dare you be still sleeping? And I'll just get up. You're being lazy." And that is in the Darbar Raga, which obviously conveys a Virarasa. But Nayaki has got a very soft touch to it, and it's got a sort of pleading tone to it. And Andal is responding because she's quite sheepish about having been caught sleeping, and therefore she's begging for their indulgence. So I've tried to combine these two ragas when singing it. And my verslations aren't generally restricted only to poems. I have done this into film songs as well. So there are quite a few movie songs I have again verslated either into Sanketi or Kannada as a rule, generally. So here is one I have done into both, and I'll just sing the Pallavi of the song. This is a very famous, very beautiful song from Sagara Sangamam or Salangayoli. So yeah, Mauna Mela Noyi, that's the original song. Mauna Mana Neram Ilamanadilinna Bharam Manadin Asaigal Idalil Maunangal Yenindri Kelungal. That's in Tamil. So when I verslated this, I've tried to use the best of both the Tamil and Telugu version, although they're quite similar. There is some differences in the meaning. So in Sanketi, it goes like this. Mauna mana neru alumana sulodu bharu. Idu mauna mana neru alumana sulodu bharu. Manasinde nilavalikan ulnela. Manasinde nilavalikan ulnela. Alitande tanala. So that's in Sanketi. In Kannada, it goes this way. Maunave kehele jagamalaguvanta vele. Maunave kehele jagamalaguvanta vele. Yedeyalle nele ಬೆಳದಿಂಗಳ ಸೆಲೆ ತುಳುಕುತ್ತಾ ನೂರಲೆ. So that's those are the two, just for a sample. And this one, I'm sure you will not need any introduction. You will immediately recognize it. So I'll just sing 5 verses or recite 5 verses, I might say here. Jaya Hanumanta Jana Gunavanta Jaya Kapisanta Trijagadamunta Ramaduta Asadala Baladhama Bhima Pavana Sutta Anjana Prema Vimala Veera Vikrama Vajrangi Ka Kumati Nivara Sumatigala Sangi Honninamaya Vodala Lolugaya Channiga Surulu Gurula Hanumayya Dvaja Vajrada Karadi Pidida Dhira Bhujadi Holeva Hullina Janivara. I'm sure you recognize this is from the Hanuman Chalisa. So again, I maintain the pattern, but also introduce the Dvitiyakshara Prasa and Yati mostly as well. So that's one. Then this one, this is something very close to my heart. Not so much the verslation, but the original. It's a Jayadeva Ashtapadi, which I have verslated into Kannada. Madana kadana kide vodagida veshe. Madana kadana kide vodagida veshe. Madana kadana kide vodagida veshe. Udurida laretusu kederida keshearo madhuri puvinda nalivalo kane kadu jane aro madhuri puvinda. The original is Smarasa Marochita Virachita Vesha Galita Kusumadara Vilulita Kesha Kapi Madhuri Purna vilasati yuvati ratyadhika guna kapi madhure puna madhure puna. So it's in Kapi Raga because the original has Kapi in it. So, and I'll just quote the second verse from it. Barasalayuta hari balalisidhange sara kosaruta losarida kodakunge. So, hari parirambhana valita vikara kuchakalashopari taralitahara. So that's the original. So, so those are that's something I wanted to share. Lastly, with due apologies to Shankara Bhagavad Pada, I would like to paraphrase the gist of everything, gist of poetry really, by combining two halves of the Nirvana Shatka, which I have verse-lated in the same meter into English. So it's Name Mrityu Shanka, Name Jati Bheda, Pita Naiva Me Naiva, Mata Na Janmaha. One second. Na bandhur na mitram gurur naiva shishyaha chidananda rupa shivoham aham nirvikalpo nirakara rupo vibhutvacha sarvatra sarvendriyanam nacha sangatam naiva muktir nameya chidananda rupa shivoham. So what I would like to say is I would like to show what poetry is about, and that's my thought here. Beyond death, beyond doubt, beyond every difference, never born, I have no mother nor a father. I am not attached nor detached. I am limitless. Poetry, poetry. Yes, I am conscious bliss. So in original, it's Shiva, yes, I am conscious bliss. I think we no doubt will agree that poetry is beyond death. We may die. Hopefully our poems don't die, or certainly don't die as soon as we die. So it's beyond death, beyond doubt. And it, of course, it levels all differences. Surely poetry is not born. It's not created. It's just discovered. It has got no mother nor a father. We may claim ourselves to be the poets or the racitas, but in fact, it's everything is a word of Goddess Saraswati Sharadamba. It's not attached. It's not detached. It is limitless. The limitations are entirely ours. And poetry, yes, indeed, is conscious bliss. So the unconscious bliss is actually patterned into poetry, and we make that conscious. And I think the only job of any poet, whether in original or as a verse later, is to try and capture that bliss and to share that bliss with other people. So I would like to summarize this in Sanketi. So, பத்யானுவாது ஒரு வார்த்தை உள்ளிக்கிற பத்தியத்தை இன்னொரு வார்த்தைக்கு சந்தோபத்தமாக அனுவாதிப்பியது. இத்த வர்ஸ்லேஷன் అంటే నా సుమారు 4 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ಕೂಳೆ ಪದத்தை ಟಂಕಿಚ್ಚೇன். ಇತ್ತ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾக ಮೂಲತೆ ಛಂದಸ್ಸುಳ್ಳೆ ರಚಿಪಿಯರದು. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಯತಿ ಪ್ರಾಸು ಮುಂತಾನವಿಯ ಇವಿಳ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸರಿಯಾ ವಚ್ಕೊಂಡೆ நம்ம பண்ணணுமா வந்து இத்த பண்ணறப்போ நம்ம உபய பாஷா மரியாதைகளை காப்பாடிಕೊಂಡು நடத்திக்கணுமா வந்து ಅಂತಣ್ಣು ಪಣ್ಣಣಮಾನಕ 2 ಭಾಷೆಡೆ ಸೂಕ್ಷ್ಮಗಳ ಅರಿತಿರணும். ಆನತ್ತಿನ ಮೂಲತುಳ್ಳಿಕ್ಕರ ಅಂದ ಲಕ್ಷಣಕ್ಕೂ ಚ್ಯುತಿ ವರಾದ ಹುಡಿ ಅದು ಅವಿಯಾದ ಹುಡಿ ಪಣ್ಣಣು. ಅಂಡಾಕ ಶ್ಲೇಷ ಯಮಕು ಶಬ್ದಾಲಂಕಾರು ಅರ್ಥಾಲಂಕಾರು ಇವಿಳೆಲ್ಲ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ನಂಬ ಮೀತ್ಕೆಣುಮ ಅಂದೆ. ಭಾರತೀಯ ಭಾಷೆಗಳೇ ಒಂಡಣ್ಣು ಇನ್ನೊಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಪಣ್ಣರ್ದು ಬಡ್ಡ ಸುಲಭು ಓಕಂಡಾಕ ವಾಕ್ಯ ರಚನೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಒರೇ ಸಮನಾಯಿಟ್ಟಿರಂದೆ. ಅನಾಕ ಆಂಗ್ಲ ವಾರ್ತೆಗೆ ಪಂಡ್ರದು ಬಡ್ಡ ಕಷ್ಟು ಅನಾಕ್ಲು ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಮಣ್ಣರ್ಥ ನಾ ಕಾಟಿ ರಾಣಿ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರಾಣಿ. ಪದ್ಯ ರಚನೆಯ ಪಣ್ಣರತ್ನಿಯೇ ಶ್ರದ್ಧೆಯನ್ನು ಪದ್ಯಾನುವಾದತೆಯು ಪಣ್ಣನು. ಇತ್ತಣ್ಣು ವಾರ್ತಾ ಸತ್ಯ ಕಾವ್ಯಮಯು ತುಸು ಕೃತಕು ಅಂಟು ಅಣಿಪಿಲ್ಲ. ಅನಾಕ ಅರ್ಥು ಭಾವು ಭಾವನೆಹ ಮಾತ್ರ ಕೃತಕಮೋ ಪೊಯ್ಯೋ ಹಾಕಾದು. ಇತ್ತ ನ ಪಣ್ಣೀಕರ ಪಲ ಕೆಲವು ಪದ್ಯಾನುವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಕಾಟರ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಕೊಂಡ ಪಣ್ಣಿರಾಣಿ. ಇತ್ತ ಕೋಟ ಉಂಗ್ಳುகளுக்கு ಪ್ರಯಾಸಮಾಚಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂಡ್ಕಂಡ್ರಾಣಿ. ಚೊವಿಯ ಕೊಡ್ತು ಕೋಟಕ್ಕೆ ಕೋಟಿ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಂಗ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. There should be no loss to the bhava or the bhavane. So the emotions and the meaning should not be lost. There might be a bit of loss to the language use. it may occasionally sound a little flowery, or it may sound a little artificial, but there should never be any loss to the emotion or the beauty of the language itself. ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
What a fascinating multilingual musical translation treat that was. Thank you so much, Dr. Krishnamurthy. Very, very fascinating. Arvind, I'll request you to summarize the symposium and invite Dr. Pathuri for his observations overall on the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghji. It's my pleasant duty now to summarize this total feast of a symposium. We began with Sri Lalita ji and Raghava striking a very modest note by citing Jayanta Bhatta, saying that there's nothing new we can say, but it can be presented in a novel way. And what a refreshing and concise manner they presented the introduction to Chandas. Maharshi Panini is credited with bringing all of Vyākaraṇa into a cow's footprint, Goshpada, and their presentation today did that for us, covering Matra, Karshana, Vritta, and Akshara meters, Akshara Jati meters. And one thing which this presentation really helped us was to cross this chasm or gap or strong yati, if we may call it, between theory and practice. So we got to hear how letters off a page can sound different when they are sung with this very foot-tapping Sangatya rendition that we heard. And we got a sense of how this knowledge is simultaneously intangible as well as embodied in a very intimate way. When we heard the first verse of the Arya Shatakam of Mukha Kavi, which was recited by Sri Lalita ji, learned from Raghavendra ji's mother, who herself learned from her grandmother. So this yatis across generations being so nimbly crossed, and the yati between theory and practice being nimbly crossed, was so enriching for us in this talk. And in the survey, we were introduced, as it were, to a gallery of meters, like friends being introduced by a common friend. We have versatile Vasanta Tilaka, melancholy Mandakranta, peaky Shikarani, sublime Shardula Vikreditam, universal Upajati, and all-round Anushtup. And there are several themes which were for which the tone was set in this talk, which other speakers have also built on, which is how language and meter seem to choose each other, and how they can bring out the best in each other by making certain vocabulary come to the forefront, and the natural rhythms being given their utterance, etc. Something which is really helpful to students as well as those who are immersed in this world of Sahitya is that Sri Lalita ji and Raghavendra ji have, for every meter illustrated, provided examples from the Kāvya Prapancha, from the glorious Kāvya corpus for us to dig into. So this, again, there is this cross of a yati from which separates beginners from what looks like very classical poetry. When we come to GS's Murthyji's talk, and also the talk we heard from Shashikiranji, it was immensely educational for us in seeing, we learned about Chandas, we also learned about how an Indian Shastra blossoms and how it flourishes in a living tradition, thriving tradition of scholarship to this very day without sacrificing any rigor. From Murthyji, we heard of several analogies which will appeal to someone from a scientific background. Chandas as a filter, which passes what we need and mostly rejects what we don't. We heard of we heard of this adjacency matrix, neighbors of the first half of the phrase and the second half of the phrase, as a kind of sieve or chalni, as we call it in Hindi. We learned about tala and laya being cast as periodicity, tala as periodicity, laya as pauses within a period. And throughout this very rigorous and mathematically grounded treatment, there was always an eye on aesthetics and acknowledgement that there are big questions which await us, which are as relevant today as they were in the days of Pingala and Kedarabhatta. What is the magic of the number 8 in the syllables of Anushtup? What is a rhythm? What makes a meter rhythmic? And these questions were not just raised in an open-ended way, but we were given a toolbox, as it were, for creating new meters. And this is not just about making random strings of Lagu and Guru and flying and wondering which one sounds pleasant. So he has given us a recipe for creating meters in a top-down way, mindful of these adjacency matrices. And it's inspirational for people both working in research and also development of new meters. Will have a lot to learn from and take forward from this talk. From Shashikiranji, we had this dose of inspiration from the biography of Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta, how he crossed his own yati from working from this barrier of visual impairment, making contributions that totally span the ages. We could also place in context, thanks to Shashikiranji, the thriving of Chandaḥ-śāstra in this day. We had a time when Lakshana or definitions or theorizing would run to catch up with the Lakshya or the examples, and how both these descriptive and prescriptive, neither of these descriptive or prescriptive elements were ignored by people studying Chandas. And also there is the way forward for many present-day researchers. If we want an Aitihasika analysis, we now have the resources to go back and check what might be the first known use of a certain meter. A Ganitiya Adhyayana, where statistics of use of poets preferring certain meters or not, the tools have come in hand waiting for us to use them. Finally, the emphasis, of course, was on Chandas Saundarya Mimamsa. Beauty, the quest for beauty. There is truth and goodness, but beauty of Chandas is what we have been celebrating throughout today. And how the celebration of the unison of Chandas and Sangeeta, which have been declared Samana Tantras by Sediyapu. We have lovely definitions which help both composers who are hobbyists as well as more mature ones, and also those who are approaching this scientifically, about the notions of yati and yati bhanga. Of yati is where two gatis meet. I'm tempted to use the English word gate, G-A-I-T, for gati, and how two of them meeting constitute this natural division. And how yati bhanga, as characterized by Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta, is about the gate of a meter and a gate of a language somehow not being in harmony. And this notion of language and meter in tandem ties back to what Sri and Raghuvaṃśa have been telling us from the beginning itself. So we came to Dr. Shankar Rajaramanji, and we could hear firsthand why Chitra Kāvya is not just picture poetry, it is wonder poetry. And the wondrousness was on display for all of us. We had heard earlier from G.S.S. Murthy and others about how one meter relates to another. And here we saw meters in close embrace, emerging from within each other. And that was astounding to see. Besides being an art form, going back to the notion of Chandaḥ-śāstra and the whole spirit of Indian knowledge systems, some key words here were samarasya and upaya. So samarasya, between any rule conflict between the demands of Chitrakāvya and the demands of Chandas, and how this was done with such artistry. And upaya, which is an expedient means without breaking the other rules. It is expedient, it is clever, it is jaw-dropping for us to see, but again, within the strictures of Chandas and Chitrakāvya. And even at something that seems to be in the cutting edge of poetry composition, to use a modern phrase, we found that some very fundamental principles lying from deep antiquity were what come to the rescue of the poet. Samyuktaksharas, the rule which G.S.S. Murthy found so remarkable, that a letter, that an akshara that is preceded by a compound, that is succeeded or followed by a Samyuktakshara compound, is treated as guru, which is a remarkable rule, is what comes to the rescue of the samarasya attempted by, comes to the rescue of Chitrakavis attempting samarasya, like Dr. Shankar. Anushtup, one of the oldest, most common meters, is also the biggest friend of the Chitrakavi, who, while attempting various new bandhas, capping this feast, we started on a musical note with Sri Lalita ji singing, and we ended with such a glorious assortment, multiple meters, multiple languages, and rendered musically. We had this theme of jumping across yatis nimbly. And here we jumped across the yati which people imagine between Samskrita and Prakrita. We had Gaha-satasai. We heard from the Sangam poets, and we heard from the Tirupavai. So when it comes to Tamil, languages that have been called ancient and languages that we speak on an everyday basis. We heard in Hindi, Sanketi, Kannada, of course, and English as well, from a variety of sources. The sheer variety of sources that were cited, we had Mankutemmana Kagga, we had Kabir's dohā-s, Gaha-satasai, and Sangam poetry, as I mentioned. Film music as well. So this, I can't think of a more fitting tribute to the idea that Chandas has been representing the cadences of Indic thought itself. There are gates of language, there are gates of meter, but our thought itself, dancing in joy, was demonstrated by Shrikantji. We get to hear more on all of this from Dr. Nagaraj Paturiji, Chief Curator of Indica. I take this opportunity to thank all speakers for this wonderful presentation, this string of gems that we got to witness today. Thanks so much. Nagaraj.
Okay. Namaste, all of you. The program so well conceived by our Megh Kalyana Sundaram ji and Arvind Iyer ji has made me have the exuberance of ecstasy, particularly because this is one of the topics close to my heart. I have been, among other things, a teacher of classical Telugu literature for around 3.5 decades, more than 3.5 decades. And during these classes, during these teaching experiences, I have been into this Chandas teaching as one of my favorite areas. What teachers of literature all through India are doing is they are making Chandas class look to be an intimidating class. Either an intimidating class or a very mechanical class. They use all these formulae like Yamatara, Jadhana, Salagam, and make the student mechanically mark the Guru and Laghu, and make them miss the beauty of the music of Chandas. My father was also a literature teacher, and from him I learned the technique of teaching Chandas through music, through singing, through the rhythm. And I found that when he was teaching, the students were able to grasp Chandas more quickly, more easily through such method, through the actual experience of the rhythm of Chandas or the singing aspect of Chandas, rather than when it was taught in a very mechanical way. When it was taught in the form of marking Gurus and Laghus, and the student is completely intimidated by that. And when the students are taught through the music, through the rhythm of Chandas, through the experience of Chandas, they were able to appreciate their audience to Astavadhanam, Shatavadhanam, or any classical metrical poetry recitation program much better. And they were able to appreciate this. They were able to appreciate classical literature. I have to make a few comments on the way we have gathered today here. One of the observations is that almost every one of the symposium speakers is from Karnataka. Shri J.S.S. Murthy, Dr. Shankar Bharadwaj, Sri Lalita Rutanaguri, Raghavendra, Hebbaldji, everyone is from Karnataka. That shows how much the state of Karnataka is preserving the study of Chandas in such a depth from several creative aspects, from several creative points of view. And I don't know how it happened, but Arvind Ayarji curated the speakers from Karnataka. And both Arvind ji and our Meg Kalyana Sundaram ji are from Chennai, from Tamil Nadu. I think and I believe that there must be enough number of scholars in Tamil Nadu also. Next time we can curate with the Tamil scholars about a similar topic. And also, as many people know, the classical versification, classical metrical versification is very popular and very much prevalent in the two Telugu states. Earlier United Andhra Pradesh, today now two different Telugu states. And the study of Chandas also has been done in a very deep and wide way in the Telugu states also. One of the things that was amazing in today's talks was Chediyapuji's Chediyapu Avaru, I should say in Kannada. It's a study of Chandaḥ-śāstra Mīmāmsa. When I was hearing this, I was remembering that this Chandaḥ-śāstra was attempted by some technical terms and concepts by Alankarikas like Kshemendra, when they were talking about ideas like the Vritta Auchitya. Kshemendra in his Auchitya Vichara Charcha, while suggestively giving us a list of Auchityas, I'm saying suggestively because he himself says that they were just suggestive forms of Auchitya. There can be more. The critics, literary critics, can come up with their own new ideas of Auchitya. So among those suggestive list of Auchityas, he mentions the Vritta Auchitya also. So when you are talking of Vritta Auchitya, you are talking of Chandaḥ-śāstra Mīmāmsa only. So probably by the time of Kshemendra, already there was an oral tradition of discussing an Auchitya matching between the content of the poem and the Vritta chosen for it. So that gives, that is what is actually Vritta Auchitya. So that was being discussed. And in various other Alankarika expressions, which were coming as part of Sukha Vistuti, Kuka Vininda, as part of the avatarikas of various South Indian kāvyas, there were mentions of mismatch between the content and the vritta that was chosen, and so on and so forth. In the contemporary, in modern Telugu literary critical discussions, one word that is used for craftsmanship in poetry, artistic skill in poetry, is shilpamu, the word chosen from Shilpa-śāstra. But that was used by a 13th century Telugu classical poet to refer to his own poetry. He says there is a Ubhaya kāvya praudi patim chu shilpamunan paraguda, he says. He uses that word shilpamu there. And it is Vishwanatha Satyanarayana, one of the neoclassical modern poets of Telugu literature, who revived this word shilpamu to talk about craftsmanship. And during the contemporary literary criticism, people went on adding their own adjectives to shilpamu. They talked about samasa shilpamu, vakya shilpamu, and so on. And one Professor Patibanda Madhava Sharma brings in a word called Chandaḥ-śāstra. Craftsmanship in Chandas. Craftsmanship in employing Chandas. Sculpting ability in employing Chandas. And he writes an entire dissertation about a classical Telugu poet Tikkana using this Chandaḥ-śāstra. And once he created this idea and concept and methodological analysis of employing Chandas for craftsmanship, people started applying that method to the other poets also. Every classical poet was almost analyzed using Chandaḥ-śāstra. Chandaḥ-śāstra of other classical Telugu poets was also analyzed. And it was taken back to Kālidāsa. It was taken back to Sriharsha. It was taken back to Nilakanta Dikshita. And they were doing Chandaḥ-śāstra of the classical Sanskrit poets also. And such analysis probably is happening in Malayalam, probably is happening in Hindi, Gujarati, and other regional Indian languages. So if we do this exploration of available contemporary studies on the employment of Chandas for Chandas Saundarya Mimamsa, probably we are going to have a big opportunity of contemporary studies in Chandas from all over India. But today we have seen a sample from Karnataka, a wonderful, extraordinary work that is happening, particularly from Dr. Shankar Bharadwaja ji. We were able to see a very rare study of a combination between Chitra-kāvya and Chandas. Actually, in contemporary literary criticism, with the domination of, Meghji is showing me his work, the book that he has done, Shankar Bharadwaji.
I'm showing a book of, since you mentioned Chitra-kāvya, there is this book on Chitra-kāvya in modern Sanskrit literature, and you spoke about the work that, further work that could be done. So I thought I should show this. This is actually a good listing of modern Sanskrit literature, Chitra-kāvya. So, and
yes, absolutely. Yeah, that is wonderful. And also, I should tell you, sharing my university experience, that inside the universities, because of an anti-classical approach of teaching, there is a repeated teaching to the students against Chitra-kāvya. This Chitra-kāvya tendency historically was dominant during 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, during the time, during post-Krishna-devaraya time, when small principalities and estates were in power, and the kings were taking pride in imitating Krishna-devaraya, and there is a very deliberate attempt to show that Chitra-kavitva is not poetry at all. There is no aesthetics in it and all that. And that led to a tendency of campaigning, propagation about Ashtavadhana and Shatavadhana also. But that is again another example of how universities are moving away from the society. At the societal level, you see that thousands of audience attend an Ashtavadhanam program, Shatavadhanam program, Sahasravadhanam. In Telugu areas, there are Pancha Sahasravadhanam also. Avadhanam mostly involves a Chitra-kavitva also in it. And when you show Chitra-kavitva to people, there is a grand reception to it, a very great admiration for Chitra-kāvya, Chitra-kavitva. But at the university level, people move away from this society and develop their own weird aesthetics and say, oh, this is not poetry at all. Because it was happening from the kings that were patronizing poets who were, they use the words like acrobatics. This is all poetic acrobatics. But today, Dr. Shankar Bharadwaji was able to show to us. Actually, I wanted to say this while he was speaking. When a Bandha Kavitva is happening, there is a pattern of repetition of a particular syllable, and the chitra there, the graphic there, is showing us the pattern of repetition of these syllables. And this repetition is an alankara. There was a question in the Q&A box. Somebody was asking whether there is a connection between alankara and chandas. This is the connection. Only when you talk of shabdalankaras, not arthalankaras, you can see a connection. In the South Indian languages like Kannada and Telugu, there is a prasaniyama, which is actually a shabdalankara, but becomes a chandas sutra. And Akshara Maitri in Vadi in the 18th century also is a Shabdalankara, but becomes a rule, becomes a Chandas Sutra, in a Chando Niyama. So, Alankarika, Shabdalankara features becoming Chando Niyamas has happened here. And also, when you go to Chitra Kāvya, particularly the Bandha Kavitva, you are able to see that what the figure of Mala or Ratha or Chakra or Naga, all these are showing to you is the kind of pattern of repetition of syllables that is happening, different from the named labeled Shabdalankaras in a Nalankarika Grantha like Chandraloka. And that is being given a form of graphic representation. So when you go from the figure, from the drawing to the syllables, then you might think that the graphic is guiding you, but the graphic is actually analyzing. It is bringing out the pattern of the repetition of syllables and how different meters and these patterns work together, how there is a restriction from the repetition pattern, I should say, not the figure, not the drawing, repetition pattern to the chandas that you can choose was beautifully analyzed by Dr. Shankar Bharadwaj ji. And I should also share with the audience that today Indic Academy, Indica, kept its promise to Sri GSS Murthy Garu by organizing his talk here. There was a recent news-making PhD announcement from Dr. Raj Popat about his breaking the tradition of Ashtadhyayi studies. And there was a discussion in an email group, Bharatiya Vidvat Parishad, where there was a feeling expressed that path-breaking research from certain scholars is not receiving enough attention. And then Indica announced that if there are scholars who are feeling currently that their path-breaking work has not received enough attention, due attention from the public, then Indica will provide an opportunity for such scholars to bring out their path-breaking, trend-setting research. Sri GSS Murthy Avaru came up with his announcement of his work on Anushtup and other Chandas aspects, showing that it is a path-breaking work, and it is indeed a path-breaking work. It is indeed an interesting work. Sri GSS Murthy ji studied his IISc course long back and retired long back, and he is keeping updated himself with the Java. He wrote a program in Java, and he is writing programs in the contemporary software languages. Is amazing the way he's keeping track with the contemporary developments in software and using them to actually analyze chandas. There are already programs for scanshan. I was about to tell Srikant ji that there are scanshan programs for English metrical analysis for English words. Actually, that is the English metrical verse is a stress test. So for us Indians to know the stress aspects exactly, accurately is a very difficult thing. So usually when I do my English metrical verse writing, I go to these scanshan softwares in English and check whether my English versification is exactly to that meter, iambic pentameter or iambic octameter or any other such meter that I employ for my English poetry. that we should do actually, because we have stress-based metrical patterns, we cannot recognize so easily without knowing the stress. And when it is syllabic length-based patterns in Indian languages, like the way it is for Greek and Latin also, the scansion softwares that are created by, for example, one Srivatsaji it is created, and there is another such software created by another Western person. They are able to do only, they are able to help in a very basic way to identify the meter of a verse. But the wonderful thing that Sri J.S.S. Murthy Avaru has done is to do a much deeper analysis of the actual verse and bring out the rhythmic patterns in it, and bring out the rhythmic patterns that are possible from various meters in Chandas. And his path-breaking analysis of Anushtup particularly is very amazing. That needs a wider reception. Indica will do as much as possible for bringing wider reception for Sri J.S.S. Murthy Avaru's path-breaking work in the area of Chandas that he is doing. There are studies of combinatoric mathematics about Pingala's work from Sri Amba Kulkarni, Professor Amba Kulkarni, and there are other analysis of mathematical findings from Pingala's Chandas. But a contemporary application-oriented study from using softwares about Chandas is something really trend-setting from Sri J.S.S. Murthy Avaru, and we will strive as much as possible for bringing attention to his trend-setting work in this area. And vacillation that I was able to hear from Dr. Srikanth ji was really amazing. His multilingual skills, his multilingual abilities, and also when I teach translation and translation theory to my students, not only myself, all over the world, people tell their students that it is metrical poetry that is very hard for translation, particularly from the source language to the target language. When a translator would like to preserve the aesthetic features of a poetic source work, the hardest of the aspects to preserve is Chandas. That is a very difficult thing. And when you try to do that, it is an acrobatic, it is a balance beam exercise. If you are preserving Chandas, you are losing poetry. If you are preserving poetry, you are losing Chandas. But Dr. Srikanth ji amazingly was able to do this balance beam exercise. He was able to preserve the poetic aspects as well as the Chandas aspects. Recently, Kushagra Aniket ji on Bhāratīya-s email list, he was sharing his own metrically equivalent translation of Shivatandava Stotra, Panchachamara meter, from Panchachamara meter into Hindi and English. Hindi, I can imagine, because I did into Telugu also in the same way. Rhythmically equivalent translation into Telugu. But English was amazing. But I'm able to see a similar work from Srikanth ji, and he knows music also, classical Carnatic also. He was employing Nata, Darbari, and all kapi and different ragas suitably for the different songs and poems that he was choosing. And this collection of wide variety of highly creative scholars, the whole credit goes to Arvind ji probably, and also Megh ji. These gems, where were they lying?
Arvind ji.
Arvind ji, yeah. So Arvind ji, do you stay in Chennai?
Yes.
In Chennai, actually Chennai is called Madras because there were Muttarasu, there was a community called Muttarasu community, and that Muttarasu community is the name became Madras. And these Muttarasu people are known for their Muttu collection. So you acquired all that skill of Muttu collection from the ocean. You dived deep into the ocean of scholarly world and you collected the Muttus with a very good quality. And all the Muttus today that we found in this symposium were really, really amazing. Each one of the talks was highly contributing. I can challengingly say that every one of the talks of this symposium was contributing. It was not a routine talk of an already known idea in the scholarly circle. Every one was a contributing research article presented for this symposium, and that shows the amount of work that is going into classical literature. Shrikantji, I was amazed. You know classical Kannada so well. Actually, there is an impression that classical scholarship, classical language scholarship is completely disappearing. There was one of our own Indic Academy members who was saying that classical literature scholarship has disappeared already in India. And actually, to argue against him, I am collecting all classical literature scholars from all over India. Now I found all of you. All of you are so amazingly scholarly in classical Kannada. And there is, yes, in Telugu also, there is a big amount of classical Telugu scholarship that is available, and I am collecting classical language scholarship from all over India. And all this is being shown in this symposium, not just limited to Sanskrit, but also in classical regional Indian languages. Scholarship has been demonstrated, particularly from the point of view of Chandas. When you talk of classical literature, it is Chandas which is very, very important. And I was so excited and ecstatic to see Sri Lalita Rupanagudi ji mentioning that there is a family tradition of singing. And the family tradition of singing is preserving the shloka recitation styles, shloka singing styles. And all this is very good information for the contemporary world to know that that is there. Such a world is there. Such a preservation is happening. Such a tradition is happening. And such a scholarship is getting preserved. Such creative, innovative research work is happening in the area of Chandas. And this is a showcasing. This symposium is a showcasing of such classical scholarship that is happening in India, and particularly in South India, particularly in Karnataka for today's symposium, we should say. It is happening, and I am glad that I am part of this symposium. I thank Shri Megha Kalyana Sundaramji and Arvind Iyerji for giving me that opportunity to be part of such a great activity, such a remarkable historical activity of Indic Academy that we have done today. Chandas is the other name for Veda, and there is a narrative without mentioning which I'll be failing today. As a part of that mythical narrative, Devas were running away from the Rakshasas. They wanted to find a shelter where Rakshasas cannot enter. And they entered Chandas. Rakshasas were not able to enter. It is Chandas which provided that shelter for the Devas to be shielded from the Rakshasas. The Dhatu Chadi Chadi achadane is the dhatu in Chandas. And that dhatu chadi, the achadana, samvarana. Someone in the symposium was mentioning that samvarana is covering the poetic deficiencies. But actually, this legend, this Vedic legend, this Vedic narrative, mythical narrative, communicates the idea that meters have the ability to preserve the divine power. In the Vedic tradition, divine power is not something that is watching from the skies with big eyes above us, some personal god, nothing of that sort. For us, Devatās are experienced by us in everything. So the aesthetics of poem have different Devatās in them. One of such Devatās is preserved by the Chandas. And the Devatā aspect of poetry is what is being mentioned here as Devatās hiding in Chandas from the Rakshasas. Rakshasas do not enter Chandas. That is, the evil powers do not enter Chandas. Chandas binds the Devatās. Poetry binds, mantras bind. We say this mantra is binding the Devatā. What is that? Actually, the divine power of aesthetic power of the poem is being bound by the Chandas and is giving us. So when you experience Chandas, you are experiencing the divine power. And I wish the audience of not just this live symposium, but of all the recorded telecast of this recorded symposium, I wish all of them to get protected from Rakshasas, from this experience of Chandas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Paturi. That was, it takes a special confluence of skills to be able to summarize after having listened to all the other conversations. And I'm so glad you ended on the note that you did about protection. Just one small, for all the viewers who are still with us, it is Shankar Raja Ramanji and not Shankar Bharadwaj, in case you're going to search for it.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And he's part of our classical library translation. He's a commissioned scholar as well. So we are so glad he's part of that. And Dr. Paturi mentioned Amba Kulkarni ji as part of his closing comments. And that's our next event, at Center for Bharatiya Languages. Our next conversation is with Dr. Amba Kulkarni on how she has built in University of Hyderabad the Samsadhini. So I request those who are with us today to continue being with us. And one small thing that I wanted to end with, in case Bharata's Naṭya-śāstra was not invoked, then I thought it should be mentioned that Chando hino na shabdosti na chandaha shabdavarjatam, right? So this most people know. But I thought I'll end with this in case Naṭya-śāstra was not mentioned. But somebody else wrote in asking me, saying, which is the next symposium? So I thought I will leave them with a clue and not the exact name. And I would love for anybody to guess it. Na chandasi vaguchariti iti. So the clue is that the next symposium is based on the text /Vedāṅga, which contains the last sentence. I'll repeat that again. Na chandasi vagucharati iti. Thank you very much once again for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to have everybody who listened as well as everybody who presented. And I'd be failing if I didn't mention my colleagues Koti Garu and Srinivas Garu, who at the back end have made all of this possible, be it the designing, be it the setting up of, the technical infrastructure for us to have these conversations. So with that, thank you very much. And I have the duty of ending this Zoom call, and I do that with a namaste to everybody. Thank you.
Namaste.